Microphone on. I see it is 8 o'clock. I see for the record that we have a full quorum.
Yes, sir.
So,
Mr. Chairman, I think you'll start as in your capacity as the State Loan and Investment Board.
all right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, today's State Loan and Investment Board meeting has been noticed as a special meeting. However, this meeting is the board's usual November meeting where the board considers the Transportation Enterprise Account Grant and Loan Program applications. Also, we do have some additional matters on the agenda today regarding some policy matters related to acquisition of federal lands and an informal or an informational matter showing the 2025 State Loan and Investment Board meeting dates for 2025 as approved by you in your capacity as the president of the State Loan and Investment Board. We also have provided some reports behind tab B. We don't have anything to add to those right now, but we would stand for any questions if you had any.
Members of the board, any questions for the matters behind tab B? Hearing none, please proceed.
Mr. Chairman, the first matter for your consideration is Board Matter C1. This is federal land acquisition direction to the Office of State Lands and Investments. Mr. Chairman, the board has previously disposed of 3 parcels within the boundary of Grand Teton National Park to the Department of Interior. Specifically, it disposed of the Jackson Lake parcel, which was mineral estate only, for 39.59 acres for an amount of $2,000. It closed on that transaction on January 5th, 2012. It then sold the Snake River parcel, which was a surface and mineral estate of 86.32 acres for $16 million. Closed on that transaction on January 5th, 2013. And then it closed or sold the Antelope Flats parcel, which was a surface and mineral estate of 640 acres for $46 million and closed on that transaction on December 12th, 2016. From those sales, the board realized a total of $62,002,000 from that disposal to the Department of Interior. Wyoming Statute 94715 subsection O states, upon request of the State Loan and Investment Board and when determined by the board to be consistent with the duties and obligations owed to the beneficiaries of the state land sales proceeds, the state treasurer shall invest funds received from the sale of state trust lands to the federal government by purchasing federal lands and improvements within Wyoming from the federal government. Therefore, should the State Loan and Investment Board determine that acquisition of federal land is consistent with the duties and obligations owed to the beneficiaries of the state trust land sale proceeds, it could utilize the funds received from the parcels previously sold to the federal government to complete a purchase of federal lands. And should the Kelly parcel also be sold to the federal government pursuant to House Enrolled Act number 50, the amount available for purchase of federal land would be $162,002,000. At this time, the director's recommendation is that the director recommends the board direct the Office of State Lands and Investments to begin a process to identify federal lands within the Powder River Basin for acquisition by the State Loan and Investment Board and authorize the director to formally initiate a land acquisition process with the United States Department of Interior Bureau of Land Management by executing any agreement or expression of interest needed to initiate such a process. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Interim Director. Are there questions for the Interim Director? Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, I think I understand the concept here, but this essentially is asking us to authorize OSLI to begin this process and start having these conversations. Any purchase or detailed proposal would come before us individually. We could evaluate benefits to the beneficiaries at that time. And this could be $1 million, $100 million, $20 million, $5 million. But we are not making any decision to buy or not today. We're saying, let's go down this path, however. Is that accurate?
Mr. Chairman, Madam Auditor, that's correct. We provide you with the historic sales just to give you an idea of the funds that you have available. This is just an initiation, and anything further than the initiation would need to come back to the board for preliminary approval to allow us to do the actual analysis. But we certainly need some direction and accept any direction from the board to begin that process. And that's essentially what this board matter does, is it's just an indication from the board to the office that we'd like you to move forward with the BLM. And if you need to enter into some type of agreement to get their process started, you're authorized to do that.
Thank you. Further questions?
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, and then I'll have the treasurer.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a little bit not understanding the timing on this. I mean, certainly I want to acquire land in the Powder River Basin so we can reach our full potential and our mineral potential and all the other resources that God has gifted our state. But it's just very interesting. I mean, we have transactions here for over a decade and nothing has happened. And then all of a sudden it's put on the agenda at the last minute on the date of the Kelly parcel sale. It just, is it tied to that? Is it an attempt to influence that vote? Why is this, what's the timing on this? Because we're 6 years into this gubernatorial administration and we haven't seen any action on doing this, which I think is important.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Secretary. So do I take your question as a personal one? You're asking me as chair.
I'm trying to understand it. I
I'm
believe
just
you
asking,
directed
I'm
the
asking you,
director.
did you ask me directly
I
to
think
answer?
so, yes.
Yeah, okay. So we have the potential to acquire lands in the Powder River Basin. It would take initiation to do that. There would also take money to acquire those. And the potential for the Kelly parcel to be able to fund that is something that has been contemplated in the action that was brought in the budget last year. But this would be, I guess, aligned, but not necessarily connected, because the Kelly parcel could fail. The sale of the Kelly parcel could fail for any number of reasons. We would still have the opportunity to pursue purchase of these lands in the Powder River Basin.
Okay, so the bottom line on your question, I think the second half kind of contradicted or was a little bit different from the first, which is that 85 million, which is the amount we already have, is enough. And that we could do this with the current monies that the state has.
And I don't see any contradiction there, sir.
Well, I just think we're 6 years into your administration, and I think, I think the timing on it is interesting. I just asking questions.
Anything more?
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Mr. Treasurer.
yeah, a couple things, I guess, to kind of opine on that is that one thing that is different, or at least in the last 4 years, is we're going to have a different administrative functioning body at the federal level. And working with this administration, I think it's going to be a lot easier. So I think this is very timely to let us know that this option exists, because we're going to be able to work with somebody we can probably work with now. And I'm glad that that was brought up. So the question I have is that this 85 million that's in that, the legislature may move that into different pots or things. I mean, this isn't like locked in stone as far as the original money that's in there.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, it is just $62,200,000
$62 million,
right now.
okay, yeah.
And it's within the Common School Permanent Land Fund, the whole of the Common School Permanent Land Fund. We're just relying on existing state statute, which in the Treasurer's chapter, that says any money you receive from the federal government, if the board decides that it's in the best interest to acquire other federal land with that money, it can. So it's within the bucket of the Common School Permanent Land Fund, and whatever happens with that is the same, regardless of where this comes from.
In the appropriation process, a follow-up, Mr. Chairman, if the legislature was so inclined and we had, let's just say we have another coal methane gas boom and you got an extra $1 billion, we could actually put money in there for that purpose.
Mr. Chairman, possibly. I guess I'm not
Okay.
I'm not sure about that.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Perhaps now might be an okay time to give an update on the Kelly working group that I've been leading and how that ties into that. Would that be helpful, do you think, Director, Interim Director and Governor?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So timing is a little bit confusing with what we see on our agenda in general today. I will say that the Kelly working group that I've been leading for the past 8 or so months, we have been exploring this concept of what an exchange or a sale contingent on a sale for the Kelly would look like. And so what we've done is we've developed acreage in the Powder River Basin that would make sense for that type of contingent sale or exchange. The process that we took, we built off of disposal lands that the BLM had put out publicly. And then we built 1280 spacing units because if you know much about the oil and gas business, to do a horizontal play, you really need a full 1280 spacing unit. So we built those out from disposal lands on contingent to state lands. In order to continue with that process, we identified those acres, which is about 120,000 acres that matches the value of the Kelly parcel. What we then did was meet with the state director of BLM. And so to move forward in this process, which I believe that meeting was a positive one, this board needs to take a vote to signal that the office can continue to explore this option. Now, I won't speak to the sale item that's been put on the agenda and interesting timing in the same, but this is in line with what we're working on the working group. And I would turn to Interim Director Crowder if I missed anything.
You did a great job.
Interim Director, could you just talk about which board does what
Absolutely.
and what we're here for today? Because I think this nonsense about this being skewed for some purpose needs to be dispelled.
Absolutely. And thanks for that opportunity, Mr. Chairman. So today's meeting has historically been noticed as the Transportation Enterprise Account meeting, a special meeting for this State Loan and Investment Board. Taking the opportunity for this board to convene and understanding that we had other matters ripe for the Board of Land Commissioners, we also noticed a special meeting of the Board of Land Commissioners to consider those matters. Specific to the authorities for each board, only the State Loan and Investment Board can acquire property as a trust asset. And historically, as the board has acquired property through time, it's done so in its capacity as the State Loan and Investment Board. So it's appropriate for the State Loan and Investment Board to give the direction to the office to seek an acquisition of land as an asset. Now, the Board of Land Commissioners has the authority to sell that property, and that's why the Kelly parcel matter is on the State Board of Land Commissioners agenda, and that's the distinction, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And then because we have transportation enterprise, rather than going into one and then out of one and then back into one, the thought was to try to be elegant and somewhat efficient in how we did this, knowing that people have traveled long distances to get here. So for anybody who has doubts about a nefarious intent here, there is no nefarious intent. Thank you. Mr. Treasurer.
I guess to follow up in a question as far as some of the things that the working group had worked at, I'd like to see I guess the total amount of revenue generated by the 120,000 minerals or otherwise, property tax, severance, and so on over the next 30 years, assuming that, in 1 year's time, all the sales are complete and everybody's off and drilling. Just kind of curious about what that amount would be over 30 years.
Interim Director, do you have any?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Treasurer, I think it's a great question. Obviously, we haven't fully identified the lands, as the superintendent mentioned, so we don't know all the potential that comes with those. But as the superintendent mentioned, we are looking at ones with oil and gas potential to generate royalties off of those, also to generate surface lease revenue off of that. That comes with surface impact payments, easements, temporary use permits, special use leases. All of those would come as well. But without fully identifying the lands and seeing what their benefit to the beneficiaries is, it's hard to give you that number at this time.
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I just might add to that, it can be, if we knew exactly what revenue off of oil and gas development would be, the business wouldn't be quite as frustrating as it sometimes is for companies and for landmen and geologists. We try to identify those and the different, shales that we're going to be exploring. But I think that is where this is truly a win-win because we still maintain $100 million in surface, but then all that additional mineral revenue that is in that area that we can very, very highly likely expect will be in perpetuity for generations to come. And we know that as our our main tax revenue source. So, so these, lands that we're looking at do not have current development for the very reason that we can move forward more expeditiously with the federal government so that we don't look at appraising minerals and that sort of thing. So, so it can be difficult.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just thinking like a swag about the average total number of wells and average production and average, we can just use Craig estimates or whatever and just kind of get an average that we might think would come back to the state. Because if it exceeds investment income, then I think that we need to put more investment income in the whole process.
And Mr. Chairman.
And Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that that's reasonable. I think we're progressing in this process as such, and so that's why the timing is with these two different items is a little bit problematic. But here, what we have before us here with this recommendation is really to be able to move forward with BLM to really start negotiating that and be able to further determine which exact acreage we're talking about.
Interim Director, I guess one thing that might be helpful here is to consider what the process might look like. I think if we need an action to begin negotiation, then negotiation would occur. We'd probably have maps that we would look at, we would identify, and they might have responses to that. There would probably be, we believe, probably an EIS or an EA. And then I think the important thing for the people of Wyoming, particularly the people who might be affected by that, is to have public outreach to our lessees and the BLM permittees so that they understand what that is. And I think we contemplate all of that. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, absolutely. And the whole process you just laid out comes after the next board meeting that we would present what we've gotten done with the Bureau of Land Management to date and to allow us to get into those types of details. Absolutely.
Would it be, on our part, would it be binding so that if it didn't look like it could bear fruit, would we be able to basically say thank you for your consideration and walk away?
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. I think this action is just intended to give us direction and give us some authority that we can kick off the BLM's process to allow them to work with us. If nothing comes of that, then obviously nothing comes of that. Or if at the next board meeting when we start that initial analysis or ask for that permission, the board's not inclined to move forward, then we don't have to go forward. It's not binding to that extent. I think another point on the process here is that we are charting a little bit of uncharted territory, I suppose, because the lands as identified by the superintendent are not totally within the BLM's designated disposal list at this time. And so they don't have a great process for that either. But we need some direction to them that we would like to acquire those. And then that we can start developing that process as we go with everything that you had mentioned as well.
And Interim Director, would it be possible to say that once the process is engaged in, that could be a fairly transparent process?
Mr. Chairman, I believe so. I think the BLM's transaction process is extremely transparent. Yep.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions? Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the director's recommendation.
Second.
It's been moved by the auditor, seconded by the superintendent. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? That motion carries.
Mr. Chairman, the next matter for your consideration is the reason we're all here, the Transportation Enterprise Account applications. The Transportation Enterprise Account Grant and Loan Program was created by the Wyoming Legislature in the 1999 legislative session for the purpose of fostering transportation investments in projects of benefit to the general public within the state. Pursuant to Wyoming Statute 1134-131, subsection C, the board may make grants or loans to public entities for the purpose of enhancing transportation in Wyoming with eligible uses of account monies, including capital investments for public transportation and improvement and maintenance of airline service and facilities. Historically, project funding under this program has been in the form of grants to public transportation providers for the purchase of vehicles. Mr. Chairman, the legislature approved $2 million in spending authority for the 25-26 biennium. These funds are for TEA grants and loans and are subject to available investment income generated by the Transportation Trust Fund. Currently, that trust fund has not met the full $2 million threshold, and it's $77,551 under that. So the balance available for these applications is $1,922,449. The Office of State Lands and Investments has received 8 TEA applications totaling $4,821,532 for the board's consideration. We have provided the board with 2 lists for the applications. The first list identifies those applications recommended for full funding, and the second identifies those applications recommended for partial funding. And I will, at this time, turn it over to Ms. Blackwell for any more color on the applications.
Ms. Blackwell, good to see you this morning.
Good to see you, Mr. Chairman, board members. This is a little lighter subject, I think. So 2 things that I want to bring to your attention. First, Interim Director Crowder mentioned that we're only approximately 77,000 short on our 2 million spending authority, which is something new that this board is getting to experience. Generally, we're about $1 million short. And then second, this is the first time I've received and vetted an application for something other than a vehicle. So this is the first time we're recommending funding for improvements at an airport, which is exciting. 2 things, one thing of note, when we get to the partial funding list, there is an adjustment there. Sblc County was just requesting a single SUV and a single minivan versus 2 minivans. Therefore, staff is recommending a change in their amount. We can go over that now, or we can go over it when you go through that list.
Why don't you proceed with that?
The request was for 1 minivan, 1 SUV, and we're recommending a $20,000 increase to the amount from $40,000 to $60,000.
Okay, thank you.
I would say all the entities on the full funding list requested 1 vehicle. That's why they're on the full funding list. The entities on the partial funding list, either their request was more than what we had available, such as the airport, or they requested multiple vehicles. In order to reserve funding for any emergency application and for next year's TEA meeting, we're only recommending funding for a single vehicle for each applicant.
Thank you. Questions, Madam Superintendent?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I see that on attachment 1, we have the recommended for full funding, but then there's not a similar chart for partial, but that's not to say that those aren't included as recommendations from staff. Is that right?
You should have a second list, attachment 2, that is for your partial funding. It's behind all of the applications that is tied to the first list.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
It's right behind some maps, Auditor, Superintendent. Further questions? Further questions?
Can you do a consent list?
That's fine. Mr. Treasurer, I'll
Yeah,
recognize you.
Mr. Chairman, I would move that we have a consent list to all of those full funding, I guess. Thank you, Madam Auditor. And that would be for the Crook County Medical Services District, 112 to 15 passenger van for 125, to the Gillette Abuse Refuge Foundation, 1 large SUV at 43,368, to Sweetwater County Transit Authority for a small bus for 128, and to the Washakie Senior Center 1 minivan for 76,000.
It's been moved, it's been seconded by the secretary. This is a bit out of order, but I do want to see if there's anyone here who would like to speak to these. I always make the comment, the train is on the tracks, it's moving down the tracks, but if you want to address the board, now's the time. And if not, we'll proceed to a vote. All right, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? That motion carries.
Mr. Chairman,
Madam,
I would move the director's rec on the consent list.
it's been moved and seconded for the director's recommendation on the consent list. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? That motion carries. Congratulations. Now stand ready to entertain motion on attachment, the second attachment for the partial funding.
Mr. Chairman, I would move a consent list of item 1, Casper Natrona County International Airport Board of Trustees, 2, Senior Citizens Council, DVA Goose Creek Transit, 3, Northwest Wyoming BOCES, and 4, Sublette County Hospital District, with the staff recommended amounts.
Very good. Is there support for the auditor's motion?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do I assume with that, with the Sublette County Hospital District, that that has been amended per
Yes.
the 60? Okay, thank you. I would second then.
Okay, we have a consent list. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? That motion carries. Again, if there's anyone here from any of those projects, if they want to address the board, I'll give them an opportunity. Please approach.
Did the sublet go up to
I think sublet is right here, and I think it did. Yeah.
Thank you. I would just, you made it very easy, so I would just say thank you for the support. Part of this process of building a hospital is we took our long-term care facility under our umbrella, so Sublette County Healthcare is under one unity, and so we really appreciate the minivan. Thank you.
And to the secretary's question, interim director, I believe that motion did include the change.
To 60,000, yeah. Great, thank you so much.
Thanks for making the trip.
Yeah, always, we're very grateful for the funding, small or big, so, yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you. Is
Mr.
there
Chairman?
anyone else? Mr. Treasurer.
Well, unless, if there's anybody else, I'd wait, but if not, I just move the passage of the consent list as recommended.
It's been moved by the treasurer. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded by the auditor. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? That motion carries. Thank you. Thanks. Well, we let you off easy, Beth. Thank you so much.
Mr. Chairman, that is everything for the State Loan and Investment Board. You can now convene as the Board of Land Commissioners if you'd like.
Yeah, that sounds correct.
Mr. Chairman, today's State Board of Land Commissioners meeting has been noticed as a special meeting to consider 1 grazing and agricultural lease matter, 2 matters related to the disposal of the Kelly parcel, and the same informational matter showing the 2025 State Board of Land Commissioner dates for 2025 as approved by you in your capacity as the President of the State Board of Land Commissioners. So, Mr. Chairman, your first item for consideration is item E1. It's a sublease agreement for a grazing and agricultural lease. Board Matter E1 details 8 sublease agreements of 1 grazing and agricultural lease going back 7 years, including an agreement for the upcoming grazing season. This is not an abnormal situation and would likely be approved already if the policy allowing the director to approve such agreements requested by the board was in place. However, in advance of that policy being approved, which we anticipate in December, we've also understood the board wanted to consider sublease agreements such as these if timing was ripe for the board to come together in a special meeting, which we have that circumstance here. Grazing and Agricultural Lease 1-8119 is currently leased by Little Medicine Creek Ranch Incorporated and subleased to Boot Ranch LLC. The lessee and the sublessee are in compliance with the board's rules with the exception of the sublease agreement, and the entities have already paid the excess rental owed. The director recommends approval of the described grazing and agricultural sublease agreement for the terms specified with the excess rental assessed as required by law. The board's not responsible for the arrangement of the parties as to the period of the sublease, which extends beyond the expiration date of any lease. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions at this time.
Are there questions for the interim director? Any questions? Is there anyone here to address the board?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mitch Edwards with Nicholson Tandem, and I represent the Wilson Creek Ranch, Boot Ranch. The circumstance here is one that's fairly simple circumstance.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
My apologies. Trying to clean up something that probably is something a normal occurrence, and that is the land that's at issue in the lease is held by Little Medicine Creek Ranch, which is a corporation created in the 1970s, a C corporation, and Boot Ranch is the shareholder of that. And so they're doing a sublease to the shareholder who has the operating entity that runs the cattle. And so we just wanted to clean that up, even though they're really practically the same people, technically they are separate entities. So that's what this is about, is cleaning up that issue of the sublease between the shareholder and the company that holds the lease.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Edwards? Thank you for addressing the board.
Thank you.
Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, I would move the director's rec to approve the sublease.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded, moved by the auditor, seconded by the treasurer. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say I plan to vote in support of this sublease agreement, but still recognizing, just for the record, my opinion on being able to cure and then having preferential right to renew. I think this is something that we do need to clear up in statute, and just as recently as last week, met with Jim Magagna of the Stock Growers to look how we can do that, but just want to mention that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Further comment, question, discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next matter for your consideration is Board Matter I-2. Board Matter I-2 is the original Board Matter H-1 from your December meeting on December 7th, 2023. Was tabled by the board at that meeting. It is the proposed disposal of the state trust land via public auction, or otherwise known as a Kelly parcel. It was tabled until the fall of 2024, which is where we are at today. And Mr. Chairman, I'll leave it there because it's a tabled matter that you would need to pull off the table for more discussion if you'd like.
So with that, is anyone wanting to take it off the table?
Mr. Chairman, I would move to untable item I-2-1.
It's been moved by the auditor, seconded by the treasurer. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays?
No.
Secretary votes no. Otherwise, the motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I don't think we have anything more to present to you, noting the presentation we gave the board back in December of 2023 meeting, including providing you with the detailed analysis and the extensive public comment we received. I would simply remind the board that this matter considers the sale of the Kelly parcel at public auction with specific terms of sale. Specifically, the director's recommendation at that time was pursuant to the board's trust land management objectives and OSLI's statutory fiduciary duty. The director recommends the board authorize the sale of 640 acres in Teton County as described and within the within the board matter, The director recommends the following terms of sale be directed by the board. The parcel shall be sold at public auction on a date to be determined by the director, but no later than January 30th, 2024. That may need an amendment currently. The auction shall be held in Teton County, Wyoming, at a location to be determined by the director. The auction shall be advertised for at least 4 consecutive weeks prior to the auction. All bidders must be vetted, approved, and registered for the auction through energynet.com prior to the auction. Only approved and registered bidders may participate in the auction. The results of the auction shall not be final until the board ratifies or rejects the auction results at its next public meeting. The minimum bid for the parcel shall be $80 million. Bid increments shall be set at $250,000 per bid. Should the auction results be ratified by the board, the winning bidder shall be responsible for all costs associated with the transaction, including but not limited to bidder registration and marketing fees, closing and title fees, and its own legal and broker fees. Sale of the parcel shall include only the surface estate and shall be subject to all surface leases for the term of each lease and existing easements on the property. The state of Wyoming would retain the mineral estate in that scenario. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Questions, Madam Auditor? Want to make a motion? Motion, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to bother to work on that date, but I would move to deny the director's recommendation to sell the Kelly parcel at public auction with all of the contingencies enumerated by the interim director.
It's been moved by the auditor, seconded by the treasurer. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So of course, we tabled this at last year, recognized that we wanted to work on pursuing contingent sale or exchanges. I think we are well on our way to that. I think that we had a productive meeting with the state director of BLM and have that same end goal. And so at this time, I will be voting yes to deny the auction because we are moving forward with that process. The reason why I've been hesitant to do that is because I think we've needed every bit of leverage possible with the federal government. I have no desire to develop the Kelly parcel whatsoever. But I think that this was able to be used as leverage. I think it still could be. But at this time, because we're moving forward with that, would support that.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'm also going to be voting aye on this. And I just want to quell the concerns of the public on this, that there was never a majority of votes to ever pursue this. I don't think there ever will be in the future. This was placed on the disposal list by the chairman at the end of last year, and I think was inappropriately done. And I think that there was just never a majority to ever do this. And so it obviously set off the budget amendment in the session of 2024, but this was never really something that the board was going to pursue.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Further discussion?
Mr. Chairman, I would just note that unless a vote is taken, none of us know what everybody's votes are.
Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons why I'm voting against this is because the structure that we have for disposing of state lands at sale or auction is an archaic structure which should be scrapped. Because there's so many things that we could do online and get so many more people on in these areas where you have high priced property, and or we can't even go out and hire a real estate agency to try to shop the thing. I mean, the structure that we have was from the 1890s. I think we need to have the legislature take a very close look at what is available, in today's society to sell property, and be able to avail the state land board to all of those different areas which our hands are totally tied. It's impossible to do a good job of disposing of property with what we have in front of us. So I just wanted to take time, Mr. Chairman, to say that I'm voting against it because it's the right thing to do, but I think that we need to change the system.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Thank you, Madam Auditor. We have a motion before us. Is there any further discussion? If there is none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays? That motion carries.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The next matter for your consideration is I3, to consider a proposed agreement for the transfer of land and interest in land by and between the United States of America at Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming. Noting the history of the parcels within the boundary of Grand Teton National Park already presented to the board, including the Kelly parcel, I just wanted to give you an update on the direct sale authorization provided by the legislature. The 67th Legislature of the State of Wyoming passed House Enrolled Act number 50 during its 2024 budget session, authorizing the board to sell the Kelly parcel directly to the United States under certain conditions. The first is any conveyance of the Kelly parcel shall be by direct sale for cash for not less than $100 million. The board shall deliver to the Department of the Interior in a form reasonably acceptable to the department, a document or form of deed conveying title to the Kelly parcel upon receipt of the required funds provided by the federal government as consideration for the parcel being sold. The sale of the Kelly parcel may be divided into multiple transactions, provided that the sale is completed entirely before transfer of the title of the Kelly parcel is made. The board is authorized to accept funds from another entity on behalf of the United States, provided that the sale and conveyance of the Kelly parcel is only to the United States. The conditions of the sale require that the Kelly parcel be leased for livestock grazing and be available for public hunting in perpetuity. And the governor shall first make a determination that the United States Bureau of Land Management's record of decision for the Rock Springs planning area does not select alternative B with respect to rights-of-way proposed Bureau of Land Management Actions 6201, 6206, 6209, or 6210 as depicted on map 2-22, and does not select alternative B with respect to fluid mineral leasing Bureau of Land Management Action 2207 as depicted on map 26. This direct sale authorization changes the analysis previously provided to the board in two ways. Disposal, number one, disposal of the Kelly parcel no longer needs to be done at public auction. For as long as House Enrolled Act number 50 is effective, which is until June 30th, 2026, the board can dispose of the Kelly parcel directly to the United States. Therefore, there is not a need for the board to approve terms of sale, only to consider the agreement between the board and the United States of America at Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming, which we will talk about in a minute. The financial return analysis has been updated from an $80 million sale price to a $100 million sale price. Specifically, the State Treasurer's Office projects a 5-year interest dividend return of 5% of the Common School Permanent Land Fund. The actual total return for the fiscal year ending on June 30th, 2023 was 6.4%. Should the Kelly parcel be sold for $100 million, the proceeds be invested by the State Treasurer in the Common School Permanent Land Fund, the actual total return rate of 6.4%, the investment would generate $6.4 million per year, and over 10 years, the return would be approximately $64 million. When compared to a hold scenario, the Kelly parcel is estimated to appreciate between $22 million and $42 million during the same time period. Current use income would add only $28,450 to that estimate over 10 years. The comparison again is $64 million in investment returns over 10 years and $22 million to $42 million in appreciation gain plus the $28,000 in use income over 10 years. Given the direct sale authorization provided by the legislature, OSLI did begin a conversation and negotiations with the Department of Interior to develop an agreement to operate the transaction. This was a huge lift on the part of the Department of Interior and the Attorney General's office. We have an agreement now for your consideration that provides a clear roadmap for closing and ensures all of the conditions of the sale placed by the legislature are met. Noting that the board was briefed on the details of the agreement, I'll highlight the main points. The agreement ensures that the Kelly parcel will not be sold for less than $100 million. Number two, grazing and hunting will be available on the parcel in perpetuity. Number three, the sale will not be completed until the governor determines that the United States Bureau of Land Management's record of decision for the Rock Springs planning area does not select alternative B with respect to rights-of-way proposed BLM management action 6201, 6206, 6209, or 6210 as depicted on map 2-22, and does not select alternative B with respect to fluid mineral leasing Bureau of Land Management action 2207 as depicted on map 26, and closing will not occur until all funds are received. Mr. Chairman, closing of the transaction is stated within the agreement to be within 60 days after execution of the agreement. Closing may be extended upon mutual agreement of the parties. The agreement's term is effective as long as the direct sale authorization provided by the legislature is effective and will terminate on June 30th, 2026. The director's recommendation is pursuant to the authorization and conditions contained within the 67th Legislature's House Enrolled Act Number 50. The director recommends that the board approve the attached agreement for the conveyance of land and interest in land between the State of Wyoming Board of Land Commissioners and the United States of America at Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming, in return for $100 million. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions, but I'll note that we have received public comment on this board matter and have provided all of those to you. There may be other individuals online or in the audience that may wish to provide additional comment.
Very good, thank you.
Chairman?
Mr. Treasurer.
A couple of things there. One, you left out subsection B there, and that says to effectuate the appropriation under subsection A of this section, the Board of Land Commissioners shall sell the Kelly parcel to the United States in accordance with the following. You brought in the following there, but you didn't say, and I just wanted to make that clear about what subsection B said. The other thing, Mr. Chairman, I think if the State Treasurer's Office were to update the potential revenue investment on this, we probably would include the compounding work that we've been doing, and essentially at a rate that's 2.5% less than what our privates are doing now. Over 25 to 30 years, it would return $1.6 billion. So I just wanted to just give you a verbal update on what we've been doing with the stuff that we've been looking at as far as a different way to invest Wyoming's money for the highest risk-adjusted return. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Further comments, questions? We'll take public testimony. We'll go back and forth. Is there anyone in the room here who would like to approach? Superintendent Jenkins, good to see you. Thanks for making the trip.
Thank you, Governor, Board. We really appreciate thank you so much for the time and energy that has gone into this for years. We recognize that it has been and continues to be a big lift for everybody. All across Wyoming, new Welcome to Wyoming signs are being installed along state highways. And prominent on those state highway signs is a picture of Grand Teton National Park. That is one of many examples of how Grand Teton National Park is important to the state of Wyoming. We, with the National Park Service, we recognize how important Grand Teton is to Wyoming. From our perspective, we have a terrific working relationship with the state, working with the legislature, working with state agencies on any number of issues. And in part, that's why we're here today, is to respond to interest and direction that had been provided by the state previously. In 2020, the legislature passed a law that was looking to increase, to monetize state trust lands, specifically in Teton County, Wyoming. In response to that, the Office of State Lands put out a request for proposals, seeking proposals on how to implement that legislation. And at that time in 2020, the Trump administration authorized the acting director of the National Park Service and Grand Teton National Park to submit a request that we wanted to work together to see about following how we could work together in doing that. And over the last 4 years, we have been working with the Office of State Lands to go through an appraisal process and explore ways to be able to follow that direction. Also under the Trump administration, the Great American Outdoors Act passed that for the first time fully funded the Land and Water Conservation Fund that provides the funding that is available now for us to be able to see about doing an acquisition. And so we stand ready, Grand Teton National Park, to continue to work with the state on trying to follow through on that direction and do something that hopefully would benefit Wyoming on a number of different fronts: conservation, tourism, helping to support schools. So thank you very much. We appreciate the time and energy that you've been putting into this and the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Superintendent. Questions? If there are none, I'll go to Representative Baer online. Representative Baer, it appears you're muted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully you can hear me now.
We can.
First of all, I'd just like to say that the requirements that we placed in the budget really have not been met because we haven't gotten to a final position on the Rock Springs RMP. I know that the governor has submitted comments on this issue, but we are not at a final. And I would say that even if we were at a final, I don't think that the current position truly does meet the idea of the amendment in the budget, in that there's still 1 million acres that are not going to be available for mineral development. Also, I'd like to say that the environmental groups have protested this, and they also believe that we're at a good position to make this sale. But without a final record on the Rock Springs area, I think it falls far short of really where we should be before moving forward with this sale. I also feel that this has been a rushed event trying to push this issue through, and we really haven't explored what the Superintendent Degenfelder has been working on, and that is a much more appropriate trade of lands. And I know that it would take much more time to do it, but we are also rushing it under a lame duck administration, if you will. And I don't think that that's a wise decision on our part. I do agree with the members of this board that have said that this is not something that we want to just sell to the public and dispose of the land. I think that transferring it to the federal government is appropriate, but the problem is that we're rushing through a deal and not getting the best deal for the state of Wyoming. In particular, we have an opportunity with this priceless piece of land to obtain something very significant for school funding, which is a constitutional requirement. And we're missing out on that opportunity by not using this land to produce a better deal, if you will. And I think that the upcoming administration probably would be much more amiable to a better deal for the state of Wyoming. And recently, both the chairman and myself have joined amicus briefs to support the Utah decision to challenge for the turnover of federal lands to the state. And I would just say that this sends a kind of a mixed message, if you will, where we're giving land to the federal government with no compensating land to the state of Wyoming. And yet here we are supporting the idea of getting all of those lands brought back to the state of Wyoming in some form there in that amicus brief. So with that, I would just say that I am opposed to this decision to sell the land at this moment. And I think it would be prudent to give it a little more time and have a lot more comment from the state, as well as really sending a simple message that the state of Wyoming should be obtaining more land from the federal government, not less. Thank you for this opportunity to comment, and I stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative. Are there any questions? Okay, with that, we'll come back to the room. Is there anyone that wants to approach? Yeah, Leslie, nice to see you.
Mr. Chairman, Leslie Mattson, Grand Teton National Park Foundation. I'm their president. Thank you so much for the opportunity to see you, talk to you today, and all the work you've done on this project. I just want to remind you our role as a private nonprofit organization that provides private philanthropic funding for Grand Teton National Park. I'm sure you've all seen many of our projects when you visited Grand Teton. Come back and see more anytime. Since the legislature passed the amendment last March, we've been working hard to raise $38 million to round up to the $100 million to purchase this parcel. If this transaction gets delayed, I think we're in real jeopardy of losing that funding, given tax year planning for many of our donors who expect to provide funding for the 31st of December. That will be problematic for us and then puts us in a challenging situation to go back to them in the future. That money leaves our organization or isn't fulfilled to our organization. It could go elsewhere to other organizations across the country and won't be used to fund public education in Wyoming. We take our role as a supporter of Grand Teton National Park very seriously, as well as our role here in Wyoming. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Mr.
Madam
Chairman,
Auditor.
I just want to capture the path to get here and maybe the timeline when something doesn't make it over the finish line. I started first hearing about this when I was campaigning in 2018. People started poking me. You got the Kelly parcel, Kelly parcel. And I'm like, what? But looking back through these records, this board first wanted and made a decision to sell the Kelly parcel in 2010. And then it didn't quite make it, it was the one straggler that didn't make it over the finish line by 2015. And so I just want to say that out loud, that it's actually been pushing a 15-year. Is that in alignment with how long has your organization been working on the Kelly parcel, I guess is my question.
Well, we've been tracking this. Thank you, Senator, Ms. Auditor. Yes, we've been tracking this for many years. I mean, you recall we were involved in the Antelope Flats project, which closed in 2016, working under a previous agreement. At that time, we weren't able to do both. So we went and Antelope Flats got done. So we've been tracking this for numerous years, always knowing that this would be something we would get involved with. In fact, all of our planning for future projects in Grand Teton are lined up for many, many cool things we hope to do in the park. And always on our timeline has been the Kelly parcel. So frankly, this effort that we've done to encourage donors to support us with the $38 million worth of revenue has delayed many other projects that we would undertake in the park, because this was our priority project. So this has been a huge lift for our organization. I'm sure everyone here can appreciate that if you raise money, but it's important, and people are wanting to participate and help not only protect this parcel in Grand Teton, but also provide funding for public education for the state.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I will go back online to Mr. Troxel. Mr. Troxel, it appears now you're unmuted.
Yes, can you hear me?
We can.
Great. I wanted to speak out as a native Wyomingite. I grew up in Cody and was born in Thermopolis, and my family has been visiting Yellowstone and Grand Teton Park for decades and decades. And I want to talk to, just briefly, I'll make this short, but I want to talk about what this part of the country means to me personally, what it means to the state of Wyoming and to people all over the world, really. Visitation in these parks has just exploded in the last few years. And we were in Teton Park just a couple of months ago. And I'm stunned by how many people from all over the world come to visit Teton Park, and they drop money all over the state as part of this visit. So it seems like any proposal that we would consider for this parcel of land, which is public land, that would take it out of public hands would be a travesty. And I hope that we can work together in every way possible to make sure that this land goes to be part of Grand Teton National Park, and to ensure wildlife corridors and clean water and also tourism revenue and recreation for all the future generations to come, not just where we are now, but going forward another 100, 200 years, however long we can make this work. So I would just really want to say, please bend over backwards to make this deal work, to get this parcel to be part of Grand Teton National Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Troxel. Any questions? If there are none, I'll come back to the room. Mr. Wallace. Good to see you. Thanks for making the drive.
Thank you, Governor, and
Now you are.
off here. Members of the board, thank you very much for the courtesies you've extended us for quite a while. My name is Rob Wallace. I live in Teton County, but during the Trump administration, I had the privilege of serving as the Assistant Secretary of the Interior, overseeing the National Park Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So I was there in August of 2020 when President Trump signed the Great American Outdoors Act. In that act was the permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is the first time in the 50-year history of the program a president has succeeded in convincing Congress to provide a steady, predictable amount of money to the National Park Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, and other government agencies to do these kinds of work. With that permanent funding of the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the Park Service's share every year is about $100 million. That's what Congress allocates from the permanent funding. So you can imagine there's 423 units of the National Park Service, and because of the work of the superintendent and your office and others, they've been able to put together 62% of 1 year's land and water conservation funds that have dedicated just to Grand Teton National Park. And those funds are greedily looked at by other delegations and other members of Congress that say, well, why can't I have funds for this and that? Because of the combined work of the state, park, they've been able to keep that $62 million together. But if we can't close the deal quickly, these other kind of greedy hands are going to pull that money away and take them to their own parks. So again, thank you for the courtesies you afforded us, and I hope you'll find a way to go forward with this today. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Are there questions? I see the auditor.
Mr. Wallace, could you talk a little bit about the land swap process with the federal government and how you've seen that work during your time in the administration?
Oh, thank you, Auditor. I started out my career a long time ago with Senator Wallop, and my first project was to try and, in the Land and Water, or excuse me, SMACRA, the Surface Mining Control and Reclamation Act, there was a provision in law that required the BLM to swap out land with the Whitney benefits that had alluvial valley coal that was going to be prohibited from being mined by SMACRA. So the legislation specifically told BLM, make a land trade. Well, that was during the Carter administration, 2 terms of Reagan, and the first term of Bush. Not a single thing was done on it because it was so complicated. Finally, the Whitney benefits had to sue in court for a takings. So my experience is it's an easy thing to think about, but boy, it's awful hard when you got to get into the weeds to get one done. It takes not years, but decades. So,
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would you say then that a sale contingent on a sale is easier than that process?
the sale?
A sale for sales. So say a sale of the Kelly contingent on a sale.
I think what
for
you
other
are thinking
BLM
about
lands.
right now is pretty ingenious to, have the Kelly monies available in a pool to pursue what you are following, Superintendent, to find lands in the Powder River Basin that would be attractive to add to the portfolio.
Mr. Chairman, just to follow up.
Please, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so my question would be, how do you ensure that the BLM would follow through with that? With my experience working with the BLM, it has not been successful in that sense. And so thus my hesitancy to do something without it being fully conditional. And as I've said, it doesn't have to be an exchange. I understand, the cumbersome experiences with that, but a sale contingent on a sale, a contract to do so. I just wonder your thoughts on how we can trust that would happen.
That's a great question. I don't have a lot of experience within the BLM silo, but I think that given the changes that have just recently occurred, there's be a lot of leverage with BLM to help them be faithful to whatever you all ask them to do. I don't know how to guarantee it, to be honest, but I think the ability to work in good faith is taking a notch up. Not to say they haven't been working in good faith with you all in the RMP and a lot of other issues, but.
Thanks. Further questions? Mr. Treasurer.
Because we hardly ever get somebody that headed the Department of Interior in here. I'm going to ask you a question that's probably right up your alley. This BLM exchange process, there's like over 40 different decision boxes on it. Do you think with this administration and control of one party in both houses, could they actually attempt to get something that was functional
more, it looks like a diagram of a DNA molecule when you look at that diagram. I don't know, Treasurer. It would be a complicated issue. Those are all sort of anchored in federal law and policy, so you got to go pull them apart piece by piece and see how they would be streamlined. And in all honesty, I don't know how that was going to happen.
It'd definitely be a heavy lift by
It'd be a
somebody
heavy
really
lift.
dedicated
Yes, sir.
to it. Yeah, thank you.
Further comments? I have one, Mr. Wallace. We were extremely disappointed at the transition to the Biden administration because we had finally gotten, after several months, the solicitor to advance our Commerce Clause suit to basically shut down Washington's attempt to shut down the coal port that would have been so valuable to us. We thought we had a direction there. We thought we had a lot going on that would bring that to the Supreme Court. However, in the transition, that got lost. And one of my concerns is what happens today and the next few weeks. I will say that yesterday I talked to former Secretary Bernhardt and just made him aware, and he was very supportive of this. But I'm just anxious to know if you're in the middle of transition, 2 days after such a victory, what happens in departments?
Well, what are the protections that Congress has put in place for a while? And Governor, I think you might be considering what happens in the last minute with a lot of things flying into the Federal Register that nobody's going to like at the end.
I'm thinking about all of that. I'm thinking about life in the building. Who's coming in? I'm thinking about what tries to get pushed out, whether there's feelings of vindictiveness, whether there's feelings of let's work together, all those things. You experienced it. I just wanted your perspective.
Well, there's a federal process for a transition. As soon as the President Trump was declared the winner, a team has, under the General Services Administration, funds to send a team into the Interior to start to get up to date. There'll be a career person appointed when the Biden administration leaves that will run the Department of Interior until a secretary is appointed. And that's a system already in place to keep the lights on, if you will. They won't do major policy work, but it's a very staged process to do that. Once the secretary is nominated and approved by Congress, and he'll start bringing his political people in, and that's when they'll start driving the policy levers. But there's also a tool that's very useful. It's called the Congressional Review Act. And that were to say, let's say the outgoing administration does something that's completely onerous and against the interest of Wyoming, hypothetically. The next Congress has the ability to cancel that action by working under the Congressional Review Act. So it's a safety valve to keep a lot of things happening that you may not like to see.
Thanks. Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to clarify a couple things you've said regarding the coal export terminal litigation and what happened at the end of the first administration. What happened in 2020 was the coal export terminal went bankrupt. And so the case, the argument that the Supreme Court looked at was that the case was moot, because the holding company that was going to do the coal export terminal had gone bankrupt. And your decision to wait a year to file that case after we brought through House Bill 251 was one of your first major vetoes. It was a bill I brought through which would have initiated that litigation. You vetoed that, said you were going to ask the AG to pursue that, then waited a year until January of 2020. Of course, then we had COVID, and then the holding company went bankrupt, and that rendered the case moot. So I just want to correct the record on what.
Thank you, Mr.
One of the factors that the Supreme Court.
Thanks, Mr. Secretary. Any question for Mr. Wallace? No, okay. Further questions? Thank you, Mr. Wallace.
Thank you all.
We'll go back to online, Mr. Ide. Representative, or Senator Wyden, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you. Members of the board, just wanted to follow up. I sent you all a couple of, or sent you an email a couple of days ago with my sentiments on the Kelly parcel, and just wanted to chime in on, follow up on that. I think that, as was mentioned earlier with the amicus with Utah, I worked with a few others with Mountain States Legal, and we got a amicus brief in from some legislators. We had like 26 of them, I think, sign on to that. I think that deferring anything you do on the Kelly parcel should definitely take into consideration this blockbuster, complaint to the U.S. Supreme Court from Utah, because we're talking, 30 million acres of surface land in Wyoming and 42 million acres of mineral estate. I ran a bill, a resolution, joint resolution this last session, very similar to what Utah's doing. I didn't get 2/3 majority. I got a majority. I plan to run that bill again, but I just want to encourage you all to, don't get too moving too fast on this, because I think there's a really good chance that the Supreme Court might hear this, and I think the Kelly parcel could be a important, valuable part of those discussions if we get there on transfer of federal lands to the state of Wyoming as state public lands. So with that, I'll leave you be, and I appreciate the discussion on this morning, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator, for your comments. Any questions? If there are none, is there anyone in the room here who wants to address? Please, Ms. Herman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name's Marguerite Herman, longtime advocate for school trust lands, and I'm here having watched this process for several years. I would have to say this is by no means, by any measure, a rushed job. This has been the most deliberate, chewed over, debated, commented thing I can remember. So I think that's not a danger. I'm going to invoke the legislative memory of Doug Chamberlain. And I remember he used to get up in the House chamber and say, keep your eye on the rabbit. So I guess I'm going to invoke the spirit of Doug Chamberlain and say, here's the rabbit here. That we hear that $6.4 million is the expected income if this deal is done. And I guess I'm speaking in favor of taking the recommendation, completing the sale as provided here, and put that money to work. It's been sitting idle. $2,000, $3,000 a year grazing income seems to me an abrogation of your duty to make the best use of these trust assets for the beneficiaries. And you are the trustees, that is your duty. I would say that holding out hope or not acting on it because of a better deal that can be made later, once again, how much have we lost by postponing it this far? And I'm glad our treasurer mentioned, and what about compounded interest? So it's not just $6.4 million a year. Add that in that we have lost for the past year that could have been money. And so anyway, so I would just say that is the deal to be made. And so I would say that we have another deal waiting in the wings, which we talked about earlier, but the two operations are discrete operations. There's the sale of this land, which conserves it, achieves that goal, conserves the land, puts the money in the permanent fund, starts generating income, and I have to really compliment the investment department and the treasurer's office. They've done a fantastic job with this. That is predictable, knowable, secure income for the schools. To put it contingent on something else that may or may not happen, that may meet that income, may not, I think is inappropriate. Do the deal, approve it, put the money in the permanent fund, and then later, if there's an exchange, a purchase, whatever that can be arranged, those are two separate things. They should not be linked. Really, this should go forward on its own merits. It reminds me a little bit of that Aesop's fable where the crow has something of value, I forget what it is, in his beak, sees something shiny, opens the mouth to get it and drops it and loses the treasured object. And so just instead of trying to think of what's later, what's contingent, what's possible, is just, this achieves I think the target, the goal of conserving, which we've heard eloquent testimony on here and before. It really discharges your duty as trustees for this very priceless piece of property for $100 million. It's been judged, evaluated to be a fair price. I would say complete the deal, put the money in the permanent fund, and then you can talk about the purchase or what exchange later. The two should not be linked. And so I encourage you, it's a great deal for all parties involved, and I would just encourage you to approve it today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Are there any questions? If there aren't, the one thing I want to make clear is that I am obliged to wait till the record of decision before anything can proceed.
And Mr. Chairman, the record of decision being?
The record of decision on the Rock Springs RMP. So that is not before us now. I have not made any determinations.
So if I could follow up with a question, I know I'm not supposed to ask you questions, but is all this contingent on the record of decision, and in what can this body reject that record of decision? What is your discretion with what comes before you? Can you reject it? Can you ignore it? Must you approve it, I guess is the question.
I think all of those options. I don't know if I can ignore. I would ask probably interim director or Mr. Peters, but I think it has to come to a determination on the part of the governor according to the statute. So that's what's before us.
And just follow-up question, once again, I apologize for asking questions, but so with that decision it falls to whom? The Board of Land Commissioners or the governor as?
Depending on how this board proceeds, it would fall somewhere, but the governor has to make that decision on the record of decision. The sale is contingent on that. That is not before us right now.
It's a separate.
My biggest concern that you heard from Mr. Wallace is that as the Biden administration winds down, that money, the money that was there from the Land and Water Conservation Fund disappears. And maybe putting that front and center gives some indication of our commitment to proceeding. So,
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman.
I've heard Mr. Treasurer first and then Mr. Secretary.
I might partially disagree with you a little bit, because the way I read this is that the Board of Land Commissioners shall sell the Kelly parcel to the United States in accordance with the following. And there's all these different provisions, the $100 million, conveyance of a deed, and those type of things, and the grazing and the livestock and the hunting. But it gets down to it. It just says that the governor shall first make a determination that the United States Bureau of Land Management's record of decision for the Rock Springs planning area does not select these different alternatives, and that's solely in your purview. I don't think it comes back to us, because that's what the law says, and it's one of the following there. So if all of those, requirements and exceptions are met, then I go back to subsection B, which says that we shall sell the Kelly parcel. From my perspective, that's what the law says, and I've got to follow the law. And so we're really just waiting for the record of decision and for you to make your determination as to whether or not the record of decision has the elements of subsection B, and they've all been met. And that's something that I guess I feel a little relief that you're going to have to make the final call. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, Mr. Treasurer, I have a question on you on that. Are you saying that the legislature can bind a constitutional office? Because I read the provision a little differently from you. But is that what you're saying, that?
I'm saying in this circumstance, in this law, that the Board of Land Commissioners, which is essentially a board made up of the constitutional members, in regards to this appropriation, have given us a directions, and from I think basically as 24 years in the Senate, whenever the legislature said shall, they meant shall, or it would have been may, and so there's no ambiguity in what that is. Now, to the question about I guess different things that can happen between different constitutional areas, and whether there's a question about whether or not the legislature has overstepped their bounds, that's a question for the court. And so someone, I think, would have to take this up in a court action to make that determination. But, absent that, I think you follow the law. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Well, Mr. Chairman, we don't have any action from, even if that's true, we don't have any action from the governor. He just said he hasn't made the determination. So that provision hasn't, even under your theory, which I think has a lot of weaknesses, being that it's in a budget, and so it's contingent to the appropriation, but also D hasn't been executed, so.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I think the drafter of this amendment did an interesting thing about tying this to an appropriation. So, which, from that perspective, I think it gets past the question of legislating in the law, because they tied it to an appropriation. I think it's probably a brilliant stroke.
Any,
Mr. Chairman and Governor, and just wondering then, sort of maybe a question, if I may, then with all the things that are up in the air and contingent on this, contingent on that, I guess what is the sum total of your decision here today then? If it's conditional on things that we don't know?
Ms. Herman, as I read it, if the board chooses to move forward, then at some point the record of decision comes, and when that record decision comes, if I take a look at it and determine that it has met the needs of the state, then I think that this agreement would come into play, because this agreement's contingent on all of those factors.
Mr. Chairman.
And is that?
And so I guess we don't know. There are just a lot of balls in the air that we don't know. Your vote today could be reliant on other things and be just one in a series.
It would
one in a series of
advance-
decisions.
It would advance the sale to the next step, but it wouldn't complete it.
Okay,
So,
thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I apologize. When I got up here, I didn't give my name, Marguerite Herman. And I'm a member of a group called Advocates for School Trust Lands, and that is, trust lands are part of their main concern. But anyway, thank you very much.
thank you. Mr. Secretary, and then I have the auditor.
Well, Mr. Chairman, the other thing I want to do, because I think there's some confusion about this provision. I mean, in addition to the record of decision not activating portions of the provision in the budget, the other problem with it, and I've talked to a number of attorneys on it, is that the shall provision in subsection B, it modifies subsection A. And so what it's doing, usually, yes, in a bill, I understand what you're saying about shall, but when it's in an appropriation, it reads a little bit differently. What it's saying is that the SBLC, if it does do something, then it shall do it in accordance with the conditions in subsection B. And so I think I do want to clarify a little bit on I mean, I think there's multiple angles on this. There's constitutional, there's the Rock Springs issue, and then there's the actual way that shall is modifying subsection A, that I just think that reading has some issues with it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, just, and this is a slight oversimplification, but I think the best example I've found as to the vote we're taking today is when you go under contract to purchase a house. You sign it, you are committed, you cannot get out of that without financial penalty. However, there are conditions. You get to do inspections, you get to do, X, Y, Z, and you declare those in the contract. So if the board were to vote to enter into contract, the record of decision, for example, is somewhat similar to, I'm purchasing this house, but if the roof cert doesn't come in, I have an automatic out. Again, I know that's a little, this is much more serious than that, but to me, that's what we're doing today. There are still things that have to be checked. However, we are authorizing that sale once those things are inspected, more or less.
Thank you, Madam Auditor. All right, move back to Representative Newsom. Representative Newsom, thanks for your time and waiting.
Thank you, Governor, and thank you to all the members of the board. Just speaking as a member of the legislature at the time that this budget amendment was passed, I think it's a great opportunity for us to go forward with this sale. As others have talked about, in business, there's a thing called opportunity cost. And as the good treasurer pointed out, how much money are we going to forego looking for a land trade or a series of land trades? It's my understanding that land trades, through this discussion and through other discussions I've had, take an enormous amount of time in identifying the land and getting that to go. And as stated earlier, the funding is there. A significant amount of the funding from the Department of Interior is kind of earmarked for this project, and that Grand Teton Foundation has raised the other money, or has the opportunity to raise this money. I think it's important that we go forward in a timely manner to preserve the amount of money that can be made off a direct sale to the government. As House Chairman of TRW, I fully support going forward with the sale to Grand Teton National Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Questions? Did I cut you off? I'm sorry if I did.
You did not.
Okay, thanks. Back to the room here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do I have to touch a button or?
You're
am I
good.
Good, okay.
Just to identify yourself.
Good morning, I'm Colton Schick, and I'm currently a senior at East High School here in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I participate in FFA, 4-H, and trap shooting. I am very involved in the outdoors as I've been around it for most of my life. I am very grateful for this opportunity to speak on the final decision of the sale of the Kelly parcel and state trust land. Being a student in public schools as well as being involved in the outdoors, I am in a very unique position, and I have my foot in both worlds. I understand that if the land is sold, proceeds would fund school district projects benefiting me as well as others, providing great opportunities for me and Wyoming youth. However, I see a far better reward and future in preserving this land. As it stands, the sale would benefit future generations on both sides, providing major funding for the Wyoming education system, as well as preserving the land for outdoorsmen and women to enjoy and embark on new adventures. Wyoming inhabits some of the most amazing species, from the bighorn sheep to the black-footed ferret. However you look at it, there is no denying that Wyoming lands need to be preserved, ensuring a future for those species and memories to come from the adventures of the Kelly parcel. I positively encourage voting members to act now in preserving the Kelly parcel section by voting yes, and ultimately preserving not only our state's land, but its legacy. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Schick. Are there questions? Thank you very, very much. I appreciate that. Moving back, Mr. Sweeney?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Governor, and members of the board. Can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you for the time. Great discussion and a number of good points this morning. And I really appreciate Auditor Racinus's different comments about timelines, and this isn't anything new that we've been discussing. And I appreciate the superintendent's, words on the possible land swap or land acquisition. I brought that up, I believe, in 2019 at a revenue committee in Lander when we were looking at this issue. And at that time, I said, let's just trade this for the entire Powder River Basin, because I do believe it's a valuable asset. But I think we can continue to look at that, as I understand the superintendent's reasoning and behind that, and possibly if the monies from the sale didn't directly go into an inviolate fund, but could be held for a short amount of time in those discussions on purchase, maybe there's a path forward with that. But I really appreciate the treasurer's comments, about the compounding. That's an amazing amount of money that our schools could use. And I appreciate, Governor, you bringing up about the coal terminal and the Commerce Clause, because timing is everything in this transition. Lastly, I really appreciate Rob Wallace's perspective, as I think you all do, and the superintendent's perspective from Grand Teton. But lastly, I'll say, I think often of Mick McMurray and what would Mick think? And Mick would take us back to the Code of the West. And so are we honoring our commitment to the Code of the West if we delay any further? And I think, Governor, you've pointed out, there are some, hurdles that the federal government must take care of with the situation in the Rock Springs with BLM. But I would urge, following the Code of the West, I would urge a yes vote today with the possibilities of the restrictions. And I would go finally back to what would Mick think. And I believe the Code of the West is the driving factor, and honor our commitments to future generations. And this is a good resolution. A lot of work has been done on both sides. And I commend the folks that are putting their funds up along with the federal government. I appreciate the time and appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Are there any questions for Mr. Sweeney? If there are none, is there someone in the room here who wants to approach? Thank you.
Chairman, members of the board, my name is Josh Metton. I'm a Cody resident and Wyoming field manager for the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. It's amazing to be here today, especially hearing about the history of how long we've been working on this issue, the history of how long we've been working on these other parcels in Grand Teton National that are now part of Grand Teton National Park, and the potential and the possibility for us all to be making a decision here that could be historic. I think it's especially amazing because when you look at the broad coalition of support for the sale of the Kelly parcel to Grand Teton National Park that we've seen over the last year in meetings across the state that were done by the Office of State Lands and Investments, by the Wyoming legislature agreeing to support this proposal, and by a number of sporting organizations working together to endorse this proposal, despite the fact that in a national park, there won't be as much hunting opportunity as there are on a state trust parcel. There is a broad coalition of support for this, and as we've heard from previous testimony, the time to strike is now. This funding is not guaranteed to continue, and the return on investment that the treasurer articulated is immense. I would ask that you think about that. Think about what your role in this is and what you want, how you want to be remembered as you make this decision. And please support this and move forward. Thank you. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? Thanks very much. I'll now see Representative Alamand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Slib Board Committee. Bill Alamand, Midwest Wyoming. Representative Bear and Senator Ide took most of my thunder away, so I'm going to spend just a little bit of time of recapping. The legislature put a condition on the sale of this land to have a final ruling on the Rock Springs RMP. And that final ruling could not contain alternate B. We do not have that ruling yet, so I do not know how we can move forward. And then also, we have that animus brief. We actually have two. The governor put in an animus brief on the Utah ruling to the Supreme Court. Also, there was an animus brief signed by around 26 senators, legislators. And I think it would be wrong if we sell this property and then we turn around and the Supreme Court sues them and we get it back. I think that's a pretty big problem. Then also, and this is a question, I know you folks would not ever want to do anything against the Constitution. However, Article 18, and this is a question because it could be somewhere else that says this, that I'm wrong. But in Article 18, Section 1, it says such lands shall be disposed of only by public auction to the highest responsible bidder. I do not want to sell this by auction because we do not want somebody coming in here and subdividing it. And I guarantee you, at auction, it would bring more than $100 million. And if we sell it, it's gone. If we trade it for minerals in the Powder River Basin, we have an income forever. And another point, the buyer's going nowhere. The government's going to buy this at some point or trade it to us. And I would rather see them trade it because in my opinion, if we sell it, it's got to be by auction as of the Constitution. And I do not want that. I would like to see us trade it for minerals in the Powder River Basin. Then we have an income forever. And I stand for questions and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Representative. Are there questions? Appreciate your comments. This could be Commissioner Jones.
It is, Governor. Thank you very much. Commissioner Taylor Jones from Sweetwater County. I appreciate your time and the board's time. Just a couple of things, and I think we're all starting to get a little redundant here, so I'll keep it brief. But in regards to the sale of the parcel in conjunction with the BLM RMP, please take your time. I know you'd mentioned that you would want to see the ROD before anything is done. I strongly encourage that. We've got kind of one shot at this to get it right. And the way we read and understand the FEIS today, the cost to Sweetwater County and the state of Wyoming is going to be massive. So the $100 million for the Kelly parcel really is a drop in the bucket compared to what we're going to lose. We're really kind of trading a $100 bill for a dime. So please take your time on that. I guess the other analogy that came to mind was if we were in the business to breed and raise horses and we decided to trade all of our brood mares for geldings, then the gelding is a good horse, but much like some parts of the RMP, but certainly will not continue our business on down the line. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions?
Question, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, Taylor, I haven't followed, all the details of the RMP. I know there were like different sections or whatever, but was there an alternative C, and how does that compare to alternative B, just briefly?
That's a long answer, but yes, there were other alternatives. There were 3 other alternatives than B.
Is C better than B?
Some parts of it, yes.
Okay. All right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think you and I have spoken about this, but obviously we'll wait for the record of decision. I know I've consulted with the delegation over there and the commissioners often, and I think I did impart the fact that nothing in what is proposed today would prohibit us from either appealing the record of decision or subsequently litigating on it. And I think those things are still very much on the table. So there's no connection between those two. Just so you know, we preserve our state's ability to continue under the normal approach to make sure that RMP is handled to the best of our ability.
Yes, Governor, I do understand that. I just think at this time, our only bargaining chip is the Kelly parcel. So if it isn't for that, then of course we can go through litigation, but who knows how long that'll take. And the ROD could be put in process while that litigation is going on, the way I understand it anyway. So the damage would be done.
Yeah, absolutely. But also understand this doesn't take the Kelly parcel out of play.
Right, correct. I understand that.
Okay. Thank you. I overlooked
Thank
the
you.
room here. And anything more, Commissioner? No, okay. Please, if there's somebody here, I apologize. I went to the online twice.
Mr. Chairman and board members, my name is Jamie Hansen. I am a Wyoming native, and I would like to express my support for the sale of the Kelly parcel to Grand Teton National Park. As a Wyoming native, I have been a direct benefactor of funding for public schools, and I truly believe that this will benefit future generations to come, not only through the $100 million deal, but through the conservation of this land and the wildlife that it supports. Originally from Laramie, I've spent the past 5 years living and working in the Jackson area for a ranch, and I have seen how crucial this landscape is to big game, whether that be elk, deer, or antelope. I would love to continue to see this land be enjoyed by our children and by our wildlife, and I truly believe that the funds from this transaction will directly benefit both. Thank you so much for your time, consideration, and your support.
Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you.
Thanks. I'll try to get us back on track if there's anybody in the room here. I did 2 online. Is there anyone in the room? Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and board members. I'm Nick Gann. I'm speaking on behalf of Trout Unlimited today.
a lot of what I was going to say has been said by some folks at Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership and others with the Grand Teton National Foundation. We're in support of the moving forward with the sale of the parcel to the park. The only thing I would add in addition is that, we're fish people. The headwaters of the Snake River in and around Jackson are a major conservation priority for us and other communities across Wyoming. The reason we're so interested in this is because the Snake headwaters to us are very unique in the West. They're high elevation. They're a cold water sanctuary in the heart of the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem. And it's one of the most resilient and intact cutthroat trout fisheries in the lower 48. It's a national priority for us to keep this ecosystem intact and support these cutthroat trout. And, we think this deal is good for Wyoming, for native trout, for healthy rivers, wildlife, and Wyoming school children. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much. I'll go back online to Mr. Peterson. Chris Peterson. Mr. Bump is Mr. Peterson. Oh, there he is. Okay. Mr. Peterson, it appears you may be muted. Mr. Peterson, again, it appears you might be muted, and if not, I'll move on to Mr. Maxwell. It doesn't mean we're overlooking you. We'll just try to make sure we get things resolved. So, Keats Maxwell?
Yes. Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, so I'm a third generation Wyomingite, and thank you all for listening. I'm here to echo the comments that we've already heard of being a benefactor of the Wyoming school systems that have let me pursue my life in a very fulfilling way. And I hope that for the rest of Wyomingites for generations to come, and the sale of this parcel to Grand Teton is a way to make that happen. And it is very clear that an immediate vote is critical for the funding to come through from some of these private philanthropic donors, and to make just strike while the iron's hot. The benefits are myriad, from benefiting all of Wyoming schools, as well as, one of the most famous places on the planet that is renowned for its beauty and its ecosystem. So I just am showing my support to sell this parcel.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. Any questions? If there are none, just because we offered Mr. Peterson, I'll go back to you, see if we can get you online, then I'll come back to the room here.
Sir, can you hear me now?
We can. Thank you, Mr. Peterson, for your patience.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Sorry, I'm kind of terrible service here. My name's Chris Peterson. I'm a lifelong resident of Wyoming. I'm a sportsman, a father of three, and ambassador for Wyoming Wildlife Federation. And I've been following this project for a lot of years, and have been advocating wholeheartedly every chance I get for this sale of the Kelly parcel to Grand Teton National Park. It's a win-win for all the organizations that have worked tirelessly to put together the funding, to put together the conditions, the agreements, with hunting and grazing and traditional uses remaining on this parcel. That's very important to me and for generations to come. The funding that we're going to get from this sale for schools is enormous and will be compounding. As mentioned earlier, that 1.2 billion over 20 years is just incredible. And the fact that I'm somewhat put off a little bit, to be honest, that people want to use this this parcel as a bargaining chip over an unrelated, really, um, plan for the BLM, the Rocky Mountain or Rock Springs Management Plan, which I know is controversial and needs resolved, but the $100 million now, it's there, it's ready, it's available, and I think that this is the best route to go. We can appeal and use the processes afforded to us constitutionally, referring to the Rock Springs Management Plan. If need be, we can explore land swaps for the Powder River Basin later down the road. That takes decades. By the time something like that got done, that 100 million could already be 1.2 billion. And I think that people have worked too long and too hard to not see this through the finish line, and it's a win-win for everybody. So please, thank you for your time, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I really appreciate all your diligence in this, and please vote yes and move this thing forward, and let's get it across the finish line. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Are there any questions? Mr. Secretary.
One thing I think it is important to note is, and I appreciate Mr. Peterson's comments, but one thing I think it is important to note is that the estimated appreciation of the Kelly parcel in the original review that Osley did is higher than the anticipated increase in the value of cash with investment returns. So I just think that, just wanted to note that.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. In the room here,
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Randy Burtis. I'm with Bowhunters of Wyoming. As you've heard many, many times, there's a lot of work that's gone into this. There's a lot of effort that's gone into this. I think using the Kelly parcel as a bargaining chip between different departments or different agencies in the Department of Interior is going to prove to be a mistake in the long run. I think if we sell this now and we use that money and we work those processes individually, I think that flow chart that the treasurer had a little bit ago on how they move lands within the BLM is an indicator that a contingent trade might be a big mistake. One thing that hasn't been brought up really is that this is part of the antelope migration corridor, and that losing that corridor would further damage our antelope herds in Wyoming. It is really, really important to what we do. Your team has spent a significant amount of time identifying these migration corridors and protecting them. This is an opportunity to do just that. So in addition to all the other reasons to say yes, that's just one more.
thank you. Question? There are none. Mr. Bump, I don't see anybody online, and so I'm going to go back to the room here if there's anyone else that wants to approach. Senator Guru.
Governor, Mr. Chairman, good morning, and good morning to each of you on the board, and thank you for your deliberations today. I also like to thank Interim Director Crowder for your report. I think it was very thorough, and I appreciate that too very much. A lot has been said, and I'm not going to take too much of your time. I just wanted to stand up. I know a lot's been said about the amending of the budget and how this came to be. As the person who wrote it, I thought I'd weigh in just a bit. After the December meeting here, when you tabled this issue, it was during that discussion, it was mentioned about getting some legislative direction. I took that to heart. I went upstairs. I didn't talk to a lawyer. I went and engaged one and asked him to help write this, and he wrote it. And that was our LSO staff, who I also appreciate very much for their help on this. Each of the words in there was picked very carefully for the very reasons that you've all been talking about. It went through the legislative process. Those of you who were former legislators, served with distinction, and I appreciate your service, know how arduous that process can be. In the budget process,
Amendments were offered. Specific amendments were offered to take this provision out in the House and in the Senate. They were both debated vigorously and both rejected. Then it went through the rest of the process. Everyone was asked to weigh in. People weighed in from around the country, around the state. We voted on the budget was approved. And this sale was scheduled to take place. Then all the folks who else you've heard from today went to work. We've been working on this virtually nonstop. There has been no rush. It's actually been very deliberate. It's also been very carefully considered to come to you today. Voting yes today on this motion to dispose of this property keeps doors open. Voting on this proposal today allows all the pressure to go to our friends in Washington to work on the record of decision. As has been talked about, I think to make this contingent on that is prudent and is smart. But it pushes them because they know too what's been discussed today about how money can evaporate as one administration morphs to another. That's important. Also talking about the philanthropic interests and how in tax law and tax time comes, disposing of this before the 31st of December figures into a lot of the donors' plans. Those are the reasons why we're here today. Voting yes keeps doors open, keeps other options open. Voting no today closes doors, puts things in jeopardy, could potentially miss a very, very unique opportunity and a very profitable one for the state of Wyoming. I urge you to vote yes. And in other speeches today, we've invoked memories of folks in our past. If you look in some of the documents today, you'll see there's easements granted by the state from the former Farm Loan Board, which is now the board that you sit on as the State Land Board. One of the easements was signed by former chairman, Governor Hansen. Cliff Hansen, if you didn't get a chance to know him, you missed something. Heck of a guy. I used to go to his house and ask for a vote every now and again. And I also had the pleasure of working with the family in other times. I ran against his granddaughter-in-law for this very office, the first time I ran. Spirited campaign. And I had the pleasure of voting for her to be on our local school board just the other day. Kate, good gal. Her husband, Brad, and I worked on another project a couple of years ago in the legislature. And as we completed that project, he was wearing this tie. It's a tie that has Lodge Company. So the Lodge Company is the concessionaire in Grand Teton National Park. I told him, well, that's a nice tie. He goes, yeah, it's my grandfather's tie. The Grand Teton Lodge Company gave it to him. After we were finished with our work, he called me out from the floor and I met him out in the lobby and he handed me a bag and the bag was his tie. He goes, Grandpa would want you to have it. I don't wear it very often, but I wear it today. His picture sits outside your office. I always go up and take a look. And just kind of one of the ties that binds us all together. He fought the park at its inception. As a landman, he fought it vigorously. But in his later years, he came to regard it as the greatest mistake he ever made and felt, as Ken Burns wrote, that the national park was America's greatest idea. So he kind of evolved in his thinking. Today we're talking about a land deal, but as you know, we're talking about much, much more. Today you have an opportunity that comes around very seldom. You get the opportunity to affirm America's greatest idea. I urge you to do so. I urge your I vote. Keep doors open. Keep this working. I think the discussions that we're having about land swaps are prudent. Land sales are prudent. I think the citizens of Teton County are going to come with another parcel and talk about land swaps. And I think that'll be a good time to talk about them. Today, the vote that's in front of you is an important vote. I urge your I vote. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, members of the land board, to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Senator. The Secretary has a
Well,
question.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Guru, one thing I wanted to note, you said that as soon as the legislative session was over, you started working on this and we're in communication. The first I had heard about any developments on this since the legislative session was 6 days ago when the governor left me a message on Friday at 4:50 p.m. saying that he had noticed this. So I just want to invite you, I think you know my cell, 307-251-1372, 307-251-1372. You can call me anytime. Would have been happy to talk with you about this. But I have not been in knowledgeable at all about, I've not been in the loop on these conversations. And I think, with some of the comments from the superintendent earlier this week, I think that is a source of some disappointment, not just for myself on the board, but that's my cell again, 307-251-1372, and it's 24/7, 365. So anytime.
Through you, Governor, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, thank you. Thank you for that. And let's say, when we passed the legislation with the provisions that were made, and there were provisions and amendments put on that through the budget process, once that was approved by the legislature, signed by the governor, we all went to work to try to affect those instructions and to move forward, and as the good treasurers had to follow the law. That's what we've been doing. We've been working on that. We've been working with anyone and everyone to work on that. And for any information that was lacked to your office, to you, or to anyone in any office in this group, to the greatest extent I can, I apologize. But we've been working on putting this together through raising funds, through working through all the facets of the conditions of sale. We've been working on that to get it together so we can get back to you to have this discussion, and we appreciate it very much.
Thank you. Any further? And thank you for your statement, Mr. Secretary. I see Representative Ottman online. Floor is yours, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Board. Pepper Ottman, House District 34. And I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to comment on this. I knew previously, of course, that this is a very, very, very important decision that you'll be making today. I also have learned a lot by listening to the testimony. And one thing I would like to say is something that my father told me is that we can't make any more land. So where I would like to talk about that for just a moment is along with the commissioner from Sweetwater. Over the last 2 years, we've been dealing with a lot of special interest groups, sportsmen, all kinds of groups. And what I'm thinking about in particular is with the RMP, the Rock Springs RMP, in that these groups have gotten together and they're very, very diligent in helping us to watch out for our wildlife and different things. But what I'll say is we represent and have to keep in mind the people of Wyoming. This RMP is almost pricing us out of utilities in our state, taking lands and doing different things. And I know here in Fremont, it's also the lands have been looked at as far as that we have, and it's been expressed, this is a prime opportunity. I don't want to be threatened by somebody saying, we may take our money back if you don't do this. What I'm looking at is how are our people going to survive if our lands are not managed by the state? And this is a prime opportunity right now with signing on with the amicus brief to move forward with the Lands Council that's been working diligently for 25 or 30 years. We are at a prime place right now to get on board of that. We don't have enough state lands right now. We don't have enough
private property right now. And so while the park is extremely valuable, it is not more invaluable than our state and the future of our state. So when we look at our communities, when we look at our oil and gas, when we look at our waters, when we look at hunting and all of that, I would say that this may not be the answer. This is setting precedent. What we just saw through, well, what we're seeing right now through 4 years of an administration that threatens to put no footprint on BLM lands and different things, federal lands. I think we need to be very cautious. So I would just add that. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Representative Ottman. Any questions? Thank you very much. I'm going to recognize President Driscoll.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. I kind of am loath to talk a little bit, but this is really an unbelievably tough decision for all of you, and I realize what it is. This is a chance to have our cake and eat it too, and I ask all of you to look inwardly and think about what we do going down the road. So as being liaison, I've got to follow your travails for the last number of years on decisions with state lands. And I ask you to look back to the Casper gravel pit. I look specifically at you, Representative Gray, and you're tasked with a responsibility to bring returns to our schools and make things work. And these parcels increasingly, as we're in pretty areas and areas of use, you're left with decisions that you're either taking care of your constitutional responsibility to educate our kids and use these grounds what they're given for, or to have a room full of people that absolutely want you to do nothing with them and take no return. And that's not what the grounds were given for. I live by a piece the same way, and I can assure you, should you not do this, whatever decision you make next on this parcel, whatever decision, land exchange, sale, nothing, you're going to need storage gymnasium, not this auditorium, because you'll never have a chance to capitalize on what the value is on it and actually be able to get it done. Because my belief is, I live next to Devil's Tower, propose a subdivision next to any park, propose highest and best use, and you're going to have thousands of people show up and have every reason in the world not to do it. This is the one time I've seen that you can literally monetize where it's at. If you want more land, you can buy it. There's nothing stops you off the proceeds to go proceed whatever. But my end is, I think it's irrational to think that you're going to get the highest value out of it, because the highest value is cutting it in small pieces, and the public of Wyoming, the very people that have spoken to you, will be standing back telling you not to do that thing. The second part I'm going to put, and it's what actually drove me to come up here. You've listened to a lot of legislators talk, and interestingly enough, we're here today because of a policy directive from the Wyoming legislature. They acted, they talked, every single one of us had a chance to intervene in any fashion we wanted, as did any of you. It came through an amendment process that was very public, very well known, and we've now set a policy for the state of Wyoming we asked to be followed. And now we're finding buyer's remorse from people that either voted against it or voted for it and now want to change their minds. And I implore to you as a legislator, and part of you are former legislators, to respect the legislative process, that when we actually set a policy, have it reviewed by the AG, the governor signs it, and do it, that we do our best to follow that policy. Without that, you've really done disrespect to the legislative process, as have legislators that go against what it is. We all win and lose on bills, but we support the policy of our organization as it comes. And I think for you folks, it's an unbelievably no-win situation for you, but there's clearly a right decision to be made. And this is a very rare opportunity for you to do the right thing for education down the road in Wyoming. And that's the way I look at it, as policy and education. I'm a landowner, legislator, all of the above, and back to special interest groups. My hat falls in 2 or 3 of them. I'm a hunter, fisherman, land and water, ag, minerals. This is probably your best chance to monetize it. Do a long-term thing. I look at the generational fund or whatever we do with the money. It will go a long ways towards alleviating part of what we know is coming up on educational costs. So I ask you for a yes vote, and I ask you to think about what the actual reality is of actually getting anything done to monetize this. If you turn it down, I think people are gonna look back and say, well, we get our $2,000 a year grazing out of it. Does that make sense? Thank you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
Yeah, and Senator Driscoll, Mr. President, I'm so glad that you clarified that for us, because that gets to that one question and that subsection B, that between shall and may. And you know, I assert that actually that it is the policy of the legislature, and you had every opportunity, and it probably was debated whether that should be a shall or a may. And I think I can kind of hear the conversation is that, well, State Land Board hasn't done anything. They tabled this thing and they're just booting it down to us. We got to make up their minds. And I think that to me, this is basically a statutory appropriation. We've done that before in the SIPA account in different areas where you've got a statutory appropriation. And so, although I'm not really fond of statutory appropriations, we got one in front of us, and I think you've given us a policy direction and made it pretty clear what the law stands for. And I would hope that you agree with that, because I think that's just what you told us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Treasurer, yes, as usual, my lawyers speak for me and clarify what I'm trying to say. I appreciate that. And it's exactly what I meant, is everybody had a bite at the apple on this. And I see buyer's remorse on it. You see it all the time in real estate deals. But everyone had a shot at the apple on this. Our process is open and transparent. Everyone has their chance to participate. And we did, and we very carefully looked at language. You saw me sitting over there looking at my phone. That's what I was doing, was double checking that I hadn't screwed up on shalls and mays, and we did shalls. The mays come down below on things that you can do afterwards, but we did a shall, and I take it seriously. I think our job's big, setting policy. So thank you very much for the clarification, and I hope you all take it to heart, because all of you are going to be back to us to do it. And if we don't follow the law, what are we?
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer. Thank you, Mr. President. It looks like the Secretary has a statement to make.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's really rude. Thank you. You know, I think in subsection 4 of this budget, we don't have a record of decision yet. So how can there be a determination of whether B has been moved off of if we don't have a record of decision yet? And why on earth would we want to speed up a record of decision when we have an entirely new administration coming in 2.5 months per the election that just happened? I mean, I think once there's a record of decision, going to be very difficult for the new administration, as awesome as they're going to be, to move off that. So this whole notion that we're trying to speed up a record of decision is really problematic to me. But I just don't understand how we have a determination that they moved off B when they don't have a record of decision yet. How is that possible?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, and I will sit after this. I've watched your engagements in front of this committee, and I won't get in a back and forth with you, but I'm going to make the comments as I see them. First, this isn't an absolute purchase. The way I understand it, this is actually a purchase agreement and that all the boxes have to be checked and gone off, and they have not yet. So this actually confirms that should the boxes be checked off, that it happens. And I can get corrected if I'm wrong, because I don't necessarily understand if that's the case or not. So we set conditions, and that's the same as a covenant on land sale. If I say you've got to take the Krells down and move the house before it goes through, it's not a legitimate sale till it happens. So I do believe that's the case with this. The ROD is going to come. The other part of my understanding of the record of decision, and I did get involved somewhat in this, made a trip or two to Washington and did some time. There's a set time frame on the record of decision, and it's going to come out before this administration comes in, regardless of what happens. So the ROD is under a set time frame, and I don't know what the days are, but they are very close here. I understood the days when I went in. That will be coming. If it goes the wrong way, this land sale does not happen. This is policy, it's statute. It says this is the condition that has to be met. Either it will be met or it won't. The determination comes down to the good governor, I believe, the way it's written. So there'll be a determination on it. There will be a record of decision. So what you're saying is a lot of what we hear, and I understand that. I've never seen land sales like the state of Wyoming does. That's going to be my last comments. I was involved in an exchange. Never, ever have I seen a deal that says, we're going to value this at open market. I'm looking at Interim Director Crowder, because I was a part of it, and they said, all right, you've got a parcel of ground. We did it with Teton. We're going to value it at the highest price. If you cut it into the smallest sliver, we're going to do an appraisal. Oh, by the way, there's no access to it. We're going to treat it as it has access. And then when you get to the end, you say, oh, hunting, grazing, fishing, and 5 other conditions, and we still want the full appraised value. By the way, that's what we got here. No private property owner would have ever agreed to that. If you want to sell it to me, I'm going to buy it unencumbered. That's the way it's appraised. Otherwise, let's give it directions to the appraisal of what it lowers the value. And I can assure you those conditions we put on there changed the value. And that's what the legislature did. We did it willingly. We knew it. And it was part of the negotiation process. Unfortunately, it wasn't done by 2 willing buyer sellers. It was done with 90 people and the governor. And we did the best we thought we could. And I think we made a tremendous long-term opportunity for the state of Wyoming. Last comment. Teton County is now our new coal mine in the state of Wyoming. When you look at the money coming out of the state, I grew up around Campbell County. We've been minerals my entire life. I would have never envisioned that tourism played a major significant role. Sadly enough, I'm part of that business. But we depend on it, and that parcel is part of what makes Teton County anyone that's going to be honest with themselves. There's one honest use for that parcel, and it's the way it sits right now. That's open space that does it. It's no different than where I live. Do you want to see fast food stands and motels, or do you want to look at Mother Nature? And so for the people of Wyoming, this is a good decision. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go online to, oh, did you have a question, Superintendent?
Well, more kind of just a brief comment, but curious your thoughts on it, if that's
Sure,
permissible.
please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to note that I think the disconnect we're having on the legislative language is that my interpretation was always that if we choose to move forward, then we shall meet these conditions. And so back in May, when we started really rolling with this exchange effort, I actually asked for interpretation from our counsel, and it was reiterated that that was the case. And so, there's always differing legal counsel, and it gets fun when it's different branches give us different, interpretation. But I want to make that clear that I don't think there's any intention to go against, the legislature or the law in any way, shape, or form. That's just how it's been presented to me, and why then we continued for months and months to move forward on the exchange route. So any comment on that is?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not a lawyer. I guess the AG probably have to comment on it. That's kind of who does representation. On the exchange, I have a definite thought on it, and I hope you pursue it. We've got at least 2 more parcels in Teton County, and we have probably another 80 school sections, isolated national forests around that the feds want just as bad as they want the Teton parcel. I think we have an abundance of land to exchange should you want to do it. I will be honest with you, when we started in this process, if you walk upstairs to my office, there's a tube of maps this big around. The governor's seen them. Representative or Senator Lummis has seen them. I rolled out and started looking at large scale land exchanges, exactly how I started in this. And as I sat and went through the process, I realized that any land exchange was going to take a decade or more to do. And I felt like when you start looking at windows, and it goes back to our good treasurer, time is money. And you miss an opportunity window and it means maybe $1 billion to our schools. And I can tell you this, back to your industry, I have thanked everyone in it all my life because I'm a rancher and my taxes have been paid for by minerals. I get a ranch the way I do because of what the mineral industry has done for us. And I'm a diehard supporter of our mineral industry, coal, oil, and gas. But as it changes, they've gone from about 70% when I've been the legislature of our state budget to around higher 40s, low 50s now. As we go through this process, we've got to figure out how we're going to fund our schools. And part of that means getting the highest and best use out of these parcels that were given to us by the federal government for that specific purpose. They weren't given to us for recreating on. They weren't given to us for me to run my cows on for good enjoyment. It was given to educate kids. And if I was sitting where one of you are at, it's how do I get the biggest broad horizon, long-term return on that money to educate kids? Because if I don't, we're going to raise taxes either on your industry, my industry, or a business downtown because someone's going to pay to educate those kids. The lawyers have made it really clear we're going to pay. And if that money's not there, what you've effectively done to my business is raised the tax on it somewhere because we will pay to educate kids. That's one thing that's not optional. But we have a box of tools that were given to us by the state for that purpose. I encourage you to use it.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going back online. I think we have Ms. Chesbro.
Yes, hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Great. So Chairman, members of the board, my name is Katie Chesbro. I am commenting as a representative as a Wyoming citizen. I'm representing myself today. I'm a benefactor of the Wyoming public school systems, as are my kids. And I really thank you for the opportunity to comment and for all the really difficult work you guys are undertaking today. After listening to a lot of really excellent testimony on both sides of this issue, I'm struck by a bit of an irony here that I'd like to point out as you guys move forward in making your decision. It is very clear that there's quite a bit of mistrust for the federal land management agencies, especially after the draft Rock Springs RMP came out, and I completely understand why. My understanding of the issue with the Rock Springs RMP is that the local citizens, local stakeholders worked with the local BLM to come to a middle ground alternative that we had good faith that the national BLM would choose. Unfortunately, the folks in DC came back with a draft RMP that did not choose the middle ground that the local citizens worked toward. Given all the work that was done through OSLI, public meetings, thousands of public comments, and the Wyoming State Legislature showing support for the sale of this parcel to the Grand Teton National Park, I just caution you all in going against those decisions that were made through proper processes by local Wyoming constituents. It seems that OSLI as the state land management agency would be going by the way of the national BLM if we were to go against the work that was done locally and by local stakeholders. And there might be risk of having that same severe mistrust that people in the state have for our federal land agencies. So I just wanted to point that out, maybe just food for thought, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chesbro. Are there any questions for Ms. Chesbro? If there are none, I'll come back in the room here. I see Senator Dockstetter.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, members of the board. Back in the legislative session when we put this together, I was an aye vote for it then, still am. That was our process of moving it forward, and I still support that legislative move that we made last winter. There's a record of decision out there with our MP, and I understand that concern. In my opinion, a lot of that got resolved Tuesday night. We've got, we'll have the support we need to make the corrections there, to make sure that we have access to our land in Wyoming. I want to commend someone on this board for their hard work, superintendent, for putting together that option to look at a trade. I wish we could have had that earlier on in the process. That was a smart move, it was wisdom, but I hesitate walking it through potentially three different presidential administrations to make it happen. Back when we were talking about this, we were standing out on that hill a couple of summers ago and looking around, there was kind of a circle of us. Superintendent of the park was there, all of us were there, and they were talking about 60, and I thought 60, that's a gold pound sand offer. I turned to the Speaker of the House and I says, why not 100 and we throw some at education? He was shaking his head yes, and I had to apologize to the Grand Teton Park Superintendent later because I was kind of blunt. I said 60 doesn't cut it, how about 100 and let's start working on education. And I caught him later in Jackson to apologize that I was kind of blunt about it, but 100 put us where we needed to be if we put it towards education. But we got another option here too, that we could pool some of that money and make sure that we get some land later and still help education down the road. A lot of work's gone into this. We made sure that ag was protected. That was important to me. Recreational access is protected. And so, Governor and members of the board, I support an aye today and keep this moving forward. It's time to get this done while we have essentially a bird in hand to get it taken care of. And ask for your support. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions? Anyone else want to approach the board? Anyone else? Anyone online? I think we've come to the end of our public comment. So I'll entertain whatever the board would like to do.
Mr. Chairman,
Madam Auditor.
pursuant to the authorization and conditions contained within the 67th Legislature's House Enrolled Act number 50, I move that we approve the agreement for conveyance of land and interest in land between the state of Wyoming, Board of Land Commissioners and the United States of America at Grand Teton National Park, Wyoming, in return for $100 million. Mr. Chairman, that agreement is attached to our board matter, and so I don't think I need to say this, but I'm going to specifically call out section 15, conditions of sale, that requires that the record of decision must satisfactorily meet those before a sale could be closed. So that would be part of my motion.
It's been moved by
Second
the
that, Mr.
auditors.
Chairman.
You've seconded it, Mr. Treasurer?
Yeah, and I want to say that the reason I'm seconding is that as I read that Enrolled Act 50, the policy is clear that after their record of decision, which is in that section 15, has been dealt with, then we shall sell the Kelly parcel to the United States. And so I would ask for an aye vote and put the ball in your court, Mr. Chairman, because you're the one that has to make that determination.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer and Ms. Secretary.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to bring the Attorney General up here because there's been some accusations that a no vote are contrary to law, and I'd like to get a position from the AG on that.
I wouldn't say it's actual accusations, it's a representation.
Okay, but
Use the right adjective.
you know, I've been advised by counsel that a no is consistent with the law, and Superintendent Degenfelder has as well. And so I'm very uncomfortable with some of the accusations that have been made, and I would like to get some ruling from the AG on this.
Mr. Peters, would you care to opine?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we previously given some advice on this. We believe that the legislation authorized the board to sell the Kelly parcel if certain conditions are met. Given the contingencies and the authorization and the role of this board in disposing of land, we believe that it would require action by this board. If the board wishes to have further discussion about legal obligations, we would request that that would occur in executive session. But happy to provide the board with additional thoughts or advice on that matter.
Mr. Chairman, would a no vote be contrary to law in your opinion?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, we believe it's within this board's ability to make a determination on this matter. I think it is before this board, and it's a decision this board can make with the legislative authorization that's been given.
Mr. Chairman, so I believe that's a no. That a no vote is not inconsistent with the law. I mean, I understand this is but there've been some representations, and so I do want to get clarity on this because I follow the law, and it's been something that it's very important to me, and it's been the #1 priority of our time as secretary. And so I believe you said now twice that a no vote is not contrary to law and that it is not a violation of the budget statute. So I just want a clear yes or no. So I guess I'll phrase it a different way. Are we okay in terms of would a no vote be consistent with the law?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary, I want to get to the direct answer to your question. I think there are a number of factors that go into it with the conditions that are in play. We've come to an agreement that we believe would satisfy all of those conditions. And so I think the answer to your question is it's still within this board's purview in determining whether to approve the agreement as presented or not. So I think a no vote on the agreement as presented does not necessarily conflict.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks. Further discussion? Superintendent.
Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to share a couple words as we near our vote of this. I want to be abundantly clear, and this is, a statement that I made back last November. I want to protect the Kelly parcel from development. I love, just like we heard from today, and actually, I don't think we heard anyone today say, let's auction it, let's go to the highest bidder. That's a beautiful thing that nobody today has said that. I have recreated there, I've hunted there, I've fished there, I've climbed the Grand Teton, as I believe the governor has. I don't want to see that be developed. I do want the best deal for Wyoming. And this is the most valuable piece of property Wyoming has ever had. And so how do we do that? How do we protect the Kelly, but keep the fiduciary responsibility that we have of this board? We have a fiduciary responsibility to maximize revenue to pay for schools. And as state superintendent, that's what I'm most concerned about, how we fund our schools in this. And so to me, we can't sell Wyoming short. And so I don't believe that voting this down today or tabling it today, which I would prefer, closes doors. I disagree with that. I think that it keeps more options open. And I'm sorry that the timing of these did not correlate. We've been working for many months on what this contingent sale or exchange could be. We had a very productive meeting with BLM leadership. It was far more positive than I would have thought, and is being worked up the leadership chain as we speak. So we're moving forward on that. This is not a delay tactic in any way, shape, or form. We're moving, and DOI is doing so as well. And so again, I'm sorry if there's collision between that effort we've been working on for months and that the sale is before us today. Unless Wyoming wants to change its tax structure, which we have heard loud and clear that they do not, we have to support mineral production in the state. We have to maintain that revenue source. And right now in the Powder River Basin, we have a judge's decision that's allowing no more new APDs. And currently, our state is already vastly owned by the federal government, 48% of surface, 65% mineral. And so a personal philosophy of mine has always been no net increase in federal ownership to the state. Thus, this idea of how do we work together to have a different alternative. I think that it's great, this concept of let's take the money and then pursue a sale. I've spent my career working with BLM and have not had success in trusting that process unless we have something contingent or contracted with them. And as I mentioned before, we're not just talking about acreage split across the state, little parcels, in different areas. What we've systemically done is created 1280 spacing units contiguous to state land that can be fully developed. An entire horizontal play can occur with no federal intervention. This is 120,000 acres. The production in perpetuity on these acres, the 100 million and that investment income is a drop in the bucket compared to what that does for schools. And that's why I'm so passionate about it. And I know there's different ideas or opinions on how to get there, but that's why I'm so passionate about that, because I think it truly gets us the maximum revenue while still protecting the Kelly parcel. And so I don't think that we need to make this decision today. We have many balls that are up in the air. And I want to make it clear as well that if a sale doesn't happen today, that does not mean the Kelly parcel will be developed. I will fight for that to not occur so that we can have this exchange option. We have members of our federal delegation that are ready to engage in this. Congresswoman Harriet Hageman agrees with this approach, and we've been working since the spring. I've been working with her office on what this would look like and drafting legislation. She serves on the committee that literally funds the Department of Interior. And so as we talk about this money going away, what that means, we have advocates, we have avenues to continue to pursue that funding if it's a sale for sale option that we have. And I would encourage you to read her op-ed that was in the Cowboy State Daily yesterday. One final point I want to make is that despite a lot of lobbying efforts and a lot of discussion, I truly believe in my heart that the conditions that the legislature set for the RMP have not been met. Sure, they didn't choose option B. They created option C, which maybe has tiny helpful points in it that are better than B, but it is still bad for Wyoming. And so, as was mentioned earlier today, that is worrisome for me, that has not been met. And again, as I mentioned before too, as per the AG's office, I don't think that this is contrary to the legislature. I would never do anything that was contrary to the law. That's why I remember it was back in May when this question was asked, or we would have never moved forward with our work. So I'll just conclude. My only mission here today is to not sell Wyoming short and not be pressured into a good deal. This is the first time ever that, a buyer dictates, in my life anyway, that a buyer dictates how much to purchase this for, not the seller. We've seen comparable comps as recently as this summer that would value the Kelly 3 times that much. I've not advocated for that. I've advocated for what a swap could be based on this $100 million level. So I'd finish with nothing worthwhile is ever easy. I hear folks that this takes time, this is difficult. A lot of this discussion happened before I was on the scene. I'm ready to go, and I'm ready to work my tail off to do what's best for Wyoming. And so with that, I do have an amendment that I would like to make on the motion if now is an appropriate time.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I would move to approve director's recommendation on the condition that an agreed upon sale occurs for no less than 100,000 acres of surface and mineral within the Powder River Basin.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion?
Well, Mr. Chairman, just quickly, I think that the good president brought forward the facts that this is only one section and literally dozens of sections that are contained within national forests and other areas. So to the extent that the sky is going to fall out and you'll have burning frogs basically on the tarmac of the airport, because it seems like it's the whole, everything hinges on this one section to be able to negotiate with the federal government, and to negotiate with the federal government with friendly, I'd say, with friendly executive session in the next 4 years, I think is an overstatement. And definitely frogs burning on the tarmac is an overstatement. But I would say that, Mr. Chairman, I think I'd say resist this. I guess the question I would have is for the AG's office is that just a straight answer is that if the legislature says that the state land board shall do something, irrespective of any conditions that makes it more restrictive. I mean, if they say we shall sell a section of state lands for this price, and we say, well, no, we're not going to do that, can the state land board actually overrule a statutory authority by a vote of 3? That's what I want to know, because I think we've had this discussion before in statute as to what was lawful and what wasn't lawful. So I just want to have a clear idea right out here in the open, not in the executive. Can we tell them to go pound sand? Because it'd be interesting to know if we've got that amount of stroke to overrule another section of the government.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Treasurer, I appreciate your question. So looking at the language of the appropriation, as we've talked about, what it says is this money is appropriated for this person, and to affect this, you shall do this. So if you are going to affect it, here's how you shall do it. This board is constitutionally created and it has obligations. It has obligations to make sure that all the sales are in the best interest of the trust beneficiaries, that you're managing this land to maximize the value. And so to suggest that the legislature could basically overturn the board's constitutional role by legislation would just cut you out completely. And we would never suggest that the board give up its authority and its obligation to act in the best interest of the trust property. So when we talk about whether that you have to do this, no, that's not, we don't view it that way. But what we do view is that you have to continue to act in the best interest of the trust beneficiaries, considering all of the other issues that there are when you make those decisions. So that's your obligation here. The legislature gave you the authorization. And when they gave you the authorization, they said, if you're going to do it, this is how you shall do it. But to say that you have to do it because they told you to negates your role in this process. And so I appreciate your view and that you may disagree with that. And that's our advice, and you can disregard it.
That you brought to it is that we shall do it if it's in the best interest. And but the difference between a shall and a may, if we figure it's in the best interest, we may or may not do it. But in all circumstances, essentially, you're saying that we can do anything we want to, anytime we want to, if it's in the best interest of the beneficiaries.
And Mr. Chair, Mr. Treasurer, and if you have the legislative authority to do it, which is what that appropriation gave you. It gave you the authorization to engage in it, and if you engage in it, you shall do it this way. So you have the legislative authorization, and then you still have your responsibility as board members to make those determinations.
Well, so the argument really is whether or not we think that with going left or right, which one gives you the greatest amount of money. And I guess what I'm saying is that we're not precluded, but to doing both, taking the $100 million and actually trading another school section for the access with for the drilling. We're not precluded from that. And then I look at it is that if we're doing it for school children, 48% of the residential property tax is paid by Teton County, which goes directly to the school system. And if you, I guess.
And Mr. Treasurer.
I'm making the argument as far as whether we vote yes or no on this.
And Mr. Chair, Mr. Treasurer, yes, we're absolutely not saying any, we're just saying that we don't think it's mandated. That being said, of course, the board needs to act in the best interest of the trust.
Auditor.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to be a no vote on the amendment. I very much support and plan to pursue a purchase. My struggle with this contingency, however, is as Exhibit A, a huge amount of work goes into these analyses to provide this board with, and I know they're estimates, but they're very helpful, what returns will be from specific parcels of property going forward. And the superintendent makes a great point that on the best day, those are estimates, but I haven't seen any of those, of course, because it's premature, those haven't been done. I at least want to understand a ballpark, because the right answer may, we're going to have 160 million to work with potentially. The right answer may be 5 million, it may be 160 million, it may be 30 million, it may be 80 million. And so I don't want to tie it to a certain outcome when all of those analyses haven't been done. And I going back to the section, I do, even though we can always negotiate for anything with that money without legislative authorization, I would look to that section that specifically talks about the checkerboard to make sure we don't forget about that as well. So no question, Mr. Chairman, just a statement.
Mr. Chairman, can we bring Ms. Monger up? Because I think her analysis, I have a couple of questions on.
Ms. Monger, and I'm going to kind of restrict discussion here to the amendment.
Okay, well, then we can pursue analysis afterwards. But
Okay.
we need to get to the bottom, because there's been, I think we have, but I just want to do a couple more cross checks on the analysis from the AG on this. So thank you.
All right, so any further discussion on the amendment? Any further discussion on the amendment? Any further discussion on the amendment? All in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nays?
No.
I hear that as 3-2. I hear that as the treasurer, the auditor, and myself against, the secretary and the superintendent for. Is that correct?
2 to 3. Mr. Chairman, that's what we heard as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
So the amendment fails. Yes, please,
Mr. Chairman.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I might just make a different amendment. I would move to approve director's recommendation on the condition that the director explore opportunities to use the proceeds from the sale to purchase federal land, including surface and mineral rights within the Powder River Basin.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Madam Auditor.
Mr. Chairman, more just a question. I guess we already moved and voted to do that. Or am I misunderstanding that?
That would be my understanding too, Auditor.
And Mr. Chair, Madam Auditor, the reason that we did that is because the Board of Land Commissioners actually makes the decision to sell the property. The State Loan and Investment Board is then who decides to purchase property for purposes of the investment. And so I'm not saying that the amendment is necessarily out of order, but that is recognizing that even though you sit in the same place and we have the same meeting, you have different functions as those two boards.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Auditor, I think my purpose for this is knowing that the motion that we voted on when we were convened under Loan and Investment Board was on a different sum of money than this one. And so, but also recognize if we need to convene as the Board of Investment to be able to do that. But that was the reason for this amendment. We're dealing with different pots of money.
Ms. Monger, just a point of information on that. I don't believe there was any particular pot of money. It was an account, and it's the account into which these funds, if this sale were to happen, would be deposited. Is that a correct?
Mr. Chair, that's our understanding of what the motion was always intended to do, even though it sort of came in advance. It was to try to take into account that we may have even more money to go out and to discuss with the BLM at the end of this meeting.
Yes, Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Treasurer.
we don't even have a ballpark figure about what mineral wealth is actually lays under the 120,000 acres, or how long it will actually be available. And I've always thought that oil wells run dry, they're not in perpetuity. And with the, who knows what's going to happen in the next few years as far as the political aspects of the federal government, to where hopefully it'll be at least 16 years before, 12 to 16 years before we get something like we've had in the last 4 years. But, there's no guarantee that minerals are going to last forever. I think it was I don't know if the Indians had said only the sky and the rocks last forever, and the rocks don't even last forever. So, and I hope that the dollar will last forever, and that's not even I guess in the future that may not even be the case. So, in perpetuity is a nice thought, but it seldom occurs unless it's I think the universe.
Okay, further discussion on the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I would just note that the board matter that we took up under Slib was for 162 million. So my understanding at least was it was for the full amount. It would only be 62 million if we didn't do this, but that it was for the full amount.
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Auditor, I think that's my question, of if that does become 162 versus, my concern was we just voted on the 62 rather than, so the answer is yes. So proceeds from this would go into that in which we have approved direction to acquire within the Powder River Basin. Okay, I'm hearing verbal yes. So with that, I would withdraw my amendment at this time.
The amendment's withdrawn. Is the second okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. We're back on the main motion.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Secretary.
Ms. Mauger, I want to explore a little more the layers of your analysis and the Attorney General's analysis on this. I mean, one, we have the conditions which have really not been met. Two, the constitutional duty of the board, but I think in alignment with the constitutional duty of the board, and your point on that is the way it's worded, which is really B is basically modifying A, which is that if the board decides to move with the sale, here's how you proceed. And that's what you said earlier, and I think, what I talked about earlier in our discussions, and I just want to confirm that there's multiple layers to your analysis. And it goes even to the statutory language, that it's beyond the constitutional argument to the way it's drafted itself.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Secretary, I think that is a fair assessment, that we look at both the language of the appropriation, we look at your role, we look at the Constitution, and all that we're saying is that it doesn't directly mandate this board to do this. It still is a vote that this board has to take.
Thanks, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a third motion, if that's appropriate.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to approve director's recommendation on the condition of an updated third-party appraisal of the Kelly parcel.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The reason for making this motion is simply because, again, we have a fiduciary to maximize revenue. The appraisal is a few years old, and there have been comparable sales in the exact region that have gone for much higher, and so thus the intention there. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Superintendent. Mr. Treasurer?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to apologize to the abrasiveness to the superintendent, of which I voraciously attacked her position, so I apologize in that regard. But Mr. Chairman, I would say in this particular area, it's a, and I hesitate to use the word perpetual, but by the time you have an appraisal, which we had a new appraisal, and the time you get to a position of a decision, you're going to be anywhere from a year to 2 to 7 years later, at which time that appraisal would be stale and you would ask again for a new appraisal. So I think that, you know, we essentially asked for an appraisal that was a little over 60 million. The legislature, I think, appropriately said that's not enough and basically added 50% to or more to the appraisal value. And I think that was reasonable because then that takes into consideration the time lag between the time that the decision is made and the timeline that, you know, the decision to go with the legislative aspect and the timeline in which you actually make the decision. So I think there's been a substantial, I guess, inflationary or market value increase baked into the cake.
Thank you, Madam Auditor.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm not trying to shoot ourselves in the foot here, but I think one of our speakers spoke up by the agreement we have before us has substantial encumbrances on this land that were not contemplated in prior appraisals. So I do believe another appraisal would perhaps go the opposite way as from what we would expect.
Further discussion? Further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
I have the superintendent and the secretary as an aye. Nays?
No.
I have the treasurer, the auditor, and the governor as nays. So that motion fails. Amendment fails, sorry. We're back on the main motion. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a final comment, just to the point that you know, given that we didn't pass any of those amendments, I will be a no on this. Not because I do not want to protect the Kelly parcel from development. I absolutely do. I just believe that there is a better option and the timing isn't right at this time. And so I appreciate all the folks that came out and spoke today. I especially appreciate our high school student that came and spoke today. It's really remarkable seeing our students be a part of this process. You see that there's varying opinions, and we appreciate you being here. And so with that, you know, I'm sorry if I fail in my effort to get the best deal for Wyoming today, but I just, those are the principles I'm going to stick by. And again, it is not in any way, shape, or form because I do not want to protect the Kelly parcel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I want to start my remarks by reiterating my position, which is identical to the superintendent's position, which is that I am in no way advocating development of the Kelly parcel. The only action actually in the last year that has moved us towards development of the parcel was the placement last October of the Kelly parcel on the disposal list, which was an action of the chairman, the governor. And that sort of set off this last 13 months. The bottom line on this is the timing on this just is not right. First of all, the stipulations that the legislature placed on this have not been met yet. There is no record of decision on the RMP. And why on earth we would want to encourage Biden-Harris to move forward with a record of decision before January 20th, that makes zero sense to me. And basically, I mean, pursuant to some of the things that were said earlier, this does encourage them to do that, because it moves forward this sale, which this administration, current administration, has said that they do want to move forward with. So That's the first thing that I just think is really problematic with this, is that it encourages a record of decision on the resource management plan before the second Trump administration begins. And once that record of decision is in place, this is going to be difficult to reverse. You know, there was some discussion, I met with Mr. Wallace yesterday about a Congressional Review Act. Well, that's going to require a majority. We'll see if it's 52 or 53. There's always some squishes in the caucus there. I don't think we're going to get any Democrats. So I actually think we're weakening our position in terms of a Congressional Review Act discussion, and then we'll have legal action on what I assume, I know the second administration will attempt to withdraw this, but there will be entities that sue the administration for doing that, for withdrawing the record of decision. So the best case is for us to have no record of decision at all by January 20th. And I still think that's a possibility, per what the governor was saying earlier, which is the last 2 months of an administration that is outgoing, it's chaos. And maybe it doesn't get done, but I actually think this highly increases the likelihood that the record of decision moves forward before January 20th, which hurts Southwest Wyoming and hurts our entire state. The price here is undervalued. There's already comps that put this way above the 100 million. And it just feels too rushed. I got a message from the governor at 4:52 p.m. on Friday, last Friday, stating that this was going to be moving forward. He actually, the wrong date was cited. It said on the message it was going to be next Friday. It's actually today, which is Thursday. And I hadn't heard anything about this possibly being put on the agenda since the legislative session. So I hadn't heard anything about this in 2024. It's very important that the board work together in advancing the interests of the state. And, you know, when thinking about the future of our state, we face so many challenges with the attacks on our core industries. It requires an executive branch that knows how to negotiate tough. And you got to be able to make a deal, but you got to be able to negotiate tough to make that deal. And I look at all the missed opportunities over my decade in public life in Wyoming. One, the approval of this gateway transmission line, where we didn't get anything in return for that. We didn't get any guarantees on rates. We didn't get any guarantees on refurbishments of coal-fired power plants. I think about the timing on the litigation on our coal export terminal, where that holding company went bankrupt, and we had the end of the first administration. So that year we lost in 2019, waiting for us to get action on the coal export terminal, really hurt this state. You have to have good timing. You have to be able to negotiate tough and know when to make a deal, but make the right deal. And the superintendent really hit the nail on the head on this one. This is not the right timing. It's awful timing. For a variety of reasons, our state got an enormous blessing. Our country got an enormous blessing with what happened on Tuesday with President Trump's victory. And to sell this to Biden-Harris, rush this at the end of this administration is a huge error. It's going to be in the history another example of how we weren't able to get a good deal to the finish line. And I think the executive branch has got to be focused on that in the future. We've heard time and time again, the provisions of the budget, this does not require an aye vote here on this board. There's constitutional reasons, the way that B is drafted, it's modifying A, also the conditions have not been met. There's 4 or 5 different reasons why that does not require an aye vote, that provision in the budget, and that's been backed up by our legal counsel multiple times. So I'm going to be voting no on this. Certainly do not want the Kelly parcel to be developed in any way, shape, or form, but we have to get the right deal for our state. We have to work together to do it. We can't have some rush process where the outcome is determined Unfortunately, I think just looking at this, it looks like that the treasurer and the auditor have been working with the governor, and there are 3 votes, but I think we could have gotten a better result on this without any development, and I'm going to be voting no. Thank you.
Mr. Treasurer.
I want to make it clear, I'm working solely and only for the beneficiary to the benefit of the beneficiaries. Not working with anybody, I'm working for the people of Wyoming. That's what I was hired to do.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just meant that there were.
Wait.
Yeah, but,
He has got the floor right now.
Yeah, that's
Don't
fine.
interrupt him.
but to get to the point of why I'm going to be an aye vote on this one here, is that I believe that in our office that we can take the 100 million and turn it into 1.6 billion. And that can be a perpetual, actually, generational fund that would benefit the students and the education system of the state of Wyoming until the dollar basically no longer exists. And I think that's a perpetual situation in that regard. And I think that will benefit, generations and generations to come. I'm 100% in favor of what the superintendent has brought forward as far as exchanges. I think we can do that, and I think we can accomplish that with or without this sale. And I don't believe that we really severely impact the positive outcome which that might occur. I know that there's people that say that everything hinges on this sale as to whether we can do land exchanges in the future. When I first looked at this, when we were standing on that hill that Senator Dockstader talked about, I says, let's do some land exchanges because we're taking land out of the equation in Teton County that probably the citizens of Teton County really should have some opportunities. And I wanted to do some land exchanges in Teton County to make sure that the citizens didn't have any severe escalation in prices to do development, and that people could actually have some land around there, and we could get some in-holdings that were closer to areas that were developable and not so pristine, and didn't have the impact on the game trails, the migratory trails. And I looked at it, and then I looked at a situation like this on a BLM land exchange process. And I would have, if I would have went down to the legislature, and I've talked to a couple of them, but basically looked at that we're going to hold this thing up for anywhere from 3 to 7 years if we go into a land exchange process. And there's no reason that we can't, proceed with this sale. Put the money into areas where we can actually make some good returns, and at the same time proceed with land exchanges, whether it's with the section that's right next to Teton Village, which is one of these sections that you could probably get $1 million, $2 million an acre, and you could probably do some land exchanges because it, in a dollar value, is much more valuable than the Kelly section. And so there's, this is I'd say is like maybe a ruby, but there's some, for land exchanges, there are pieces up in Teton County that are much more valuable that would facilitate more exchanges than what's contemplated both by me and the superintendent. And so, it's not like we're giving up on the land exchanges. But we've got to look at it from the standpoint that you have to be able to have something, enough value to move it. Now, the park system loves this, and really they can put some pressure on different areas of government. But I don't think that we need in the next 4 years that leverage, because we've got a friendly administration. And so I don't think there's the need to have that much leverage going forward for the next 4 years. But any of these things take a lot of time, especially in land exchanges. I impressed upon our representative that we've got to streamline this process of the BLM. And that what we need to do that essentially is to do some things where we get the same software as the BLM in our land office, And then as things move forward, that'll make things so much easier. We can grease the wheels and actually get something done. So there's a lot that I see that's important about this. And this isn't a do-all and end-all as far as the record of decision. It's baked in the contract that the record of decision has to be dealt with before anything moves forward. All this does is authorize the procedure to go forward. And why that's important essentially is that it allows for the folks that are trying to make this $100 million deal to go to their donor base and actually do something before the end of the year, and gives them maybe another 3 weeks. The record decision is going to be done. I think it's going to be done before the end of November, one way or the other, with or without us moving forward on this. And so this is the time to go ahead and facilitate this process, and understand is that we're not leaving anything that the superintendent or the secretary wants to do on the back burner, because we can move this forward to the front burner, just moving forward with some of the other parcels that are in Teton County, to give them the leverage and to give us the facilities and the functionality to move forward in a reasonable manner. And again, be able to talk to all the stakeholders and include the legislature in this process again. And so, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'm an aye vote on this.
Thank you. Madam Auditor, did you have a comment?
Mr. Chairman, good commentary, and I think we should get to a vote, but a couple things. I feel like I heard the comment. I heard the comment that we were selling this to Biden-Harris, and I disagree with that. This was a priority. This funding was a priority of the Trump administration. He was an advocate for this funding. This came out of his administration. And my understanding is it actually was quite a chore to try to maintain this priority through the last 4 years. And so I just want to be clear, put that on record. I think, as we all are, I'm extremely concerned about the RMP and that record of decision coming down. We do have that protection in this contract one way or the other. But my overarching thought on that is that we, the state of Wyoming, have made somewhat of an artificial connection between those two things. And I understand why we did that, because it was so bad that we're trying to throw all the spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. But I don't think anybody at the federal level is tying those things together to the extent the state of Wyoming is. At the federal level, I think they have very little to do with each other. That's just how it works. And Mr. Chairman, I think the treasurer said it very, very well, to remind us that we're working for the beneficiaries. I know we're all doing that. It's hard for me to forget that, because I have to get 2 of those beneficiaries out of bed early and to school on time in order to be able to make it to Slib by 8, which is hard. And I have not been late yet once in 6 years.
Very good. Mr. Secretary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple things I do want to clarify on some of my previous comments. We hear that the funding might run out, the appropriation might run out at the end of this year, and that's why this has to be rushed. First, the argument is that the federal appropriation will run out. But then a few seconds earlier, when we hear this argument, we hear that the funding actually came in the Trump administration. So the idea that the second Trump administration would not reauthorize this funding, that's the predicate for that whole statement. And I think that's problematic. And then the second thing we hear is, well, the donors that are helping to facilitate this for tax reasons, they've got to get this done. And I just don't think that is an argument that is determinative for this board. I think that's a problematic to use that as a determination. We have to look out for the beneficiaries. The failure of that motion on reappraising the value of this property was very important for my decision here today. I don't think we're getting the best deal for this. And I do think this encourages a record of decision in the resource management plan down in southwest Wyoming. And I think it's very important that we start to work together, because these last minute things, 6 days before the meeting, I mean, from the conversations that we heard in this meeting and earlier, I mean, I just think there's been other stuff brewing that from the superintendent's statements, and certainly from my experience, two members were not privy to. So I just think for a variety of reasons, and ultimately this is about the beneficiaries, and I'm not there on that, and that's guiding my no vote here today.
Question.
Thank you, and the question's been called. I'm going to take the privilege of the chair to respond to the notion that somehow I was working with a couple of members on this board differently than others. The only person that I have worked with for some time has been the superintendent, and the notion there was to have her enabled to work with Jimmy Goolsby to identify the parcels, and we had the map, and in fact, we worked on that. So the superintendent has been privy to that effort up until we got the negotiated document back that Jim Peters presented. So I saw it literally moments before I asked the superintendent to come in. It was, as I apologized to her, somewhat sudden, but because she has been the person who has been there for some time, I wanted to make sure that she had a chance to appreciate that. And she explained to me that she was a hard no, and that she really wanted an exchange, and we talked a little bit about the particulars about it. I then called you, which you didn't pick up, and I then called the treasurer, and I think I called the auditor right around that time. So we were all there. I wanted to make sure that we had it posted a week early, and I think the interim director can tell you that. So that's sort of the history of this, and anybody who thought this wasn't something that we were going to consider probably didn't understand the tabled motion. So, and with that, the question has been called. So all in favor signify by saying aye. Let's do this on a roll call. Madam Auditor.
Aye.
Mr. Treasurer. Aye. Mr. Secretary. No. Madam Superintendent.
No.
And I am an aye. That motion carries. Mr. Interim Director, is there anything more to come before the board?
Mr. Chairman, that's everything that we have for the Board of Land Commissioners today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would move to adjourn.
It's been moved to adjourn. It's been seconded. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.